Hey there! Did you know Baker's always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower-than-low prices? And when you download the Baker's app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Baker's today. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
The Vietnam War, it's over. Your job's just begun.
A new HBO original limited series.
Welcome to the world of spycraft. Strap in.
From executive producers Park Chan-wook and Robert Downey Jr.
What are you concealing?
Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Viet Thanh Nguyen.
What if I told you that I was a communist spy?
How did you become this?
The Sympathizer, streaming April 14th on Max. Subscription required.
You are about to participate in the most ambitious culinary experiment ever imagined.
This competition is going to test everything.
Adapt quickly to anything. I mean anything. The wildest day of your life starts right now.
Series premiere 24 and 24, Last Chef Standing. Sunday night at 8 on Food Network. Stream on Max.
Slashers, huh? What's your favorite scary movie?
Not that one.
And welcome back to Horror Queers. We're talking, I find you very attractive and a little bit sad. We're talking good movie. And we're talking, it's killing me. And I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we're talking, a naked American man stole my balloons.
I will not lie, I forget how funny this movie is until I'm watching it again.
And see, that's the funny thing. I actually forgot how scary this movie was. I remembered all the humor. And there were parts of this where I was like, oh my God, like I can't believe we're doing this.
Oh my God, there are some set pieces in here that are just all-timers, literal all-timers.
Absolutely. And yes, everyone, in case you didn't notice, we are discussing John Landis' horror comedy classic, An American Werewolf in London. A big heavy hitter that I'm surprised it's taken us this long to get to, Joe.
I feel like we've always had it earmarked, and it was just one of those, when do we need a heavy hitter? And we decided the time is now.
The time is now. But, okay, before we go any deeper, let's bring in our guest. Any deeper? Is that right? Deeper. That sounds very sexual.
Wow. Right off the top.
Let's bring in our guest who's waiting in the wings, everyone. She is a media personality and co-host of the Blurty Massacre podcast, a show featuring topical conversations from the perspective of black nerds. They've also got bylines at sites like Dread Central and Afropunk, and you may also remember her from our episode on Incident in a Ghostland. Please welcome back Xero Gravity.
Oh, yes. I'm back on the show. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yes, welcome back. And welcome to this movie, by the way.
This is going to be a good one. I don't know if you all know, but I recently tripped, stumbled, fell, plummeted down a werewolf rabbit hole back in November. So, boy, am I ready to talk about this one.
Well, I'm curious. So is the werewolf subgenre a particular favorite of yours?
I can say it is now. It wasn't before, but it is now. I'm not going to say I'm an expert in it, but it's definitely up there in terms of subgenre, a reawakening, if you will. I think I was just bored and looking for like a theme.
Yeah. Right.
After October, November comes along, and I felt like taking on a project, like something personal that I could do on my own time.
Sure.
So I thought about, all right, what seems appropriate for November? I asked Twitter because first I thought it was, okay, maybe is it pirates? Am I going to go down the pirates rabbit hole in November?
Xero.
Twitter was like, girl,
no.
That's August, relax. I was like, okay, all right. Pirates, August, got it. So I started thinking about November a little bit more. All right, so we're transitioning from fall to winter, right? Okay, what else has a very heavy transition? Werewolves. Boom.
There we go.
And that's how I got here.
Joe, do you have a strong affinity for the werewolf genre? I confess, it is not. I don't dislike werewolves. It's just not my go-to subgenre. So yeah, I feel like I've seen quite a few werewolf movies, but I never walk out of them feeling like, yeah, that really hit the spot. But this one is one of the ones that comes the closest for me.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same as you. I won't actively seek out, and I also won't actively shy away from a werewolf film, but I feel like they're so easy to get wrong, or they sometimes feel so familiar. And Xero, feel free to correct me if I'm absolutely off the mark with that comment. It just often feels like, yeah, we're trying to echo the greats. And the problem is the title we're talking about is one of the greats.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really easy to fall into that category of echoing the greats, which was probably my opinion as well before I fell down this rabbit hole. But as I started watching more and more, I realized that I actually kind of have to dig for them. They're not as common as you would think, just because vampires versus werewolves is such a pop culture thing, and there's so many vampire movies. But there's really not that many werewolf movies. And the ones that are the most popular, you're right, Joe, they kind of slip into the mold and become a little cheesy. But some of the more, or the lesser known ones, I should say, actually kind of slap. Like Late Phases was awesome. I had never even heard of that movie before.
Really?
Dog Soldiers was right up my alley.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, Silver Bullets, actually not that bad either. I got a thing for that one, but I gave it a revisit. That one was pretty good too. Bad Moon, another one that I had never heard of. Mm-hmm. And then also a film that I don't know if you guys have covered, but if you haven't, I would love to hear you guys cover this one. But My Animal, that came out last year.
We did.
Excellent.
We did that one as a micro queers, yeah, because of course it's Canadian, but excessively queer. Folks, it's a bit of a fever dream. I think we both came down on saying it's a little bit too long for what it's trying to accomplish, but the visuals and the werewolf is good.
Yeah, I think the two lead performances are really good, that's funny, Xero, because I was going to ask you, out of your marathon, what is the most recent werewolf movie that really hit it for you? And it sounds like it might have been My Animal, because that was last year.
Yeah, I think I have a double answer to that. I think My Animal definitely hit the hardest. As a queer person, you know, I also, and I want to piggyback on the fever dream part. I was wondering, after I went to my screening, there's a great independent theater in Chinatown here called Roxy Cinema. It's hidden underneath a hotel. And there was a Q&A after with the director and the two leads. And I started to do a little bit of research about the makers of the film. And it turns out that the director, Jacqueline Castles, actually comes from like music videos.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Which makes sense why, that whole movie felt pretty euphoric and sexy. And,
the sex scene is so good in that one.
Yeah, I think, did I answer the question? I think
I did. Yeah, so you said you had a double answer. So one of them was My Animal. What was another recent werewolf movie that you were like, oh yeah, that hits the spot?
The Wolf of Snow Hollow. That one came out 2020.
I feel so on the outside looking in with that one. I didn't like it that much, but I might need to give it another shot because I was not familiar with Jim Cummings, and I just got a lot of him yelling a lot in that film. So I didn't find a lot of humor in that film, which maybe that's on me, so I need to give it a revisit. I
would definitely recommend it because I had the same experience as you. I had seen it closer to the time that it was released, and I was kind of just like, what the fuck was that? Like, it didn't resonate at all. I didn't really get the angle of it. I guess my first watch, I'm like, is this supposed to be funny? I don't really know. Then I go, dive into my quote research, and on my second watch, I had a couple beverages and I read a little bit about it first, so I kind of knew what the angle was supposed to be, and it was definitely easier to digest that way. Right. But also, real quick, Blackout.
Oh, the Larry Fessenden one.
Oh my God. It was really good. Actually, I just saw that one last week at IFC Center. That one was new.
Yeah, I think if people are listening to this episode when it drops, that one is still doing the festival circuit. But it should be coming out on VOD, I think, in the near future. But yeah, that one has gotten some really strong reviews. It looks, like it's a low budget indie, so you can't go in expecting, Rick Baker special effects. But it actually looks pretty good in terms of the visual aesthetic.
I mean, Larry Fessenden knows how to make a cheap thing look very expensive, so I'm fine with that.
That's for sure.
Well, so was An American Werewolf in London, was that a first-time watch for you back in November, or had you seen it prior to your marathon?
I have seen it. I actually saw it in a film class when I was in college, like an intro to film, something simple like that.
Right.
And, it was school. So it was just homework, really, or clips that I had to watch in order to get my assignment in. Mm-hmm. And then when I rewatched it in November, that's when I realized, okay, this is the greatest werewolf movie ever made. I get it now.
It's such an interesting beast. So, this was a revisit for me, but I hadn't seen this movie probably since the first time I saw it. I didn't watch it for school, but I definitely think I watched it when I was in college. And I remember really liking it.
Mm-hmm.
So this was, while not a first-time watch for me, it felt like a first-time watch for me. And I just love the way this film juggles tone. And I know that if you look at reviews at the time, not everyone agreed with that.
Well, it's a hard beast, right? I mean, I think the first time you watch this, it's actually a little hard to get on its wavelength, because even if you go in knowing it's a horror comedy, there are whole sections where you think, oh, this pacing is really uneven. I'm not really sure he knows what the story is that he's trying to tell. But once you can figure out what Landis is doing, then it becomes a lot easier to go with the flow.
Well, what I kept thinking about, Joe, while I was watching this, while I was doing research for this, was when we discussed The Skin I Live In a few months ago, and there's that quote from Pedro Almodovar where he says, everything has humor in it, in real life, even serious situations. And I just kept thinking how, yes, we are injecting a lot of humor into some very dark material here, and dark sequences here.
Mm-hmm.
But it also feels very authentic to where I'm like, I feel like a real person would sometimes react this way to certain things.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, well, why don't we dive into how this got made? And luckily, there is a 97-minute documentary on this movie called Beware the Moon from 2009 that is included in Arrow's 4K set of this. So all this information comes from that.
There we go.
So John Landis actually came up with the story for this movie when he was 18 years old. And the way he tells it, he was working in Yugoslavia as a production assistant on the World War II film Kelly's Heroes. And a member of the crew who was Yugoslavian was driving back with him in a car, and they came across a group of Romani people. Landis uses a different term in the documentary, but I do think it was probably from at least 15 years ago.
Gotcha.
But the Romani people appeared to be performing rituals on a man's corpse before they buried him. And they had him wrapped in rosaries and garlic. So the man who Landis was with said, he could understand what they were saying, their prayers and their blessings. And so when Landis asked, what are they doing? He said, well, they're doing these rituals to ensure that this man would not rise from the grave.
Okay.
Uh-huh. So Landis was very taken with the idea and thought that it was a really good idea for a movie. How would he react if the corpse did claw its way back to the surface and pull himself out of the grave? What do you do in that situation? How do you deal with something that doesn't exist when it's standing in front of you and you're using logic and reason to try to parse through this thing that isn't logical or reasonable?
I love that he also then goes to werewolf territory as opposed to the direction all the rest of us would be thinking, which is
zombies.
Vampires.
Oh.
Okay, maybe not all of us.
Well, I guess because I'm thinking, I guess vampires would have been really prolific here, but Night of the Living Dead was 1968, I think? So it would have come out just before this happened, which is why I was thinking, why wasn't he doing Night of the Living Dead?
Mm-hmm.
From there, he tried to figure out, though, which monster to do. Because he had that idea, how would one react to the situation, but he wanted to add a monster to it. So I think, ultimately, this exchange with the Romani people, that fed into the ghost stuff that's in this movie. Which, again, not the first thing you would go to.
Mm-hmm.
But he wanted to do a monster because he just really wanted to do a monster movie. So he eventually came to werewolves, and he started doing a lot of research. And this research led him to discover that the highest number of people who were executed for supposedly being werewolves were both in France and the UK. Apparently they make links to where it's kind of like their version of the Salem witch trials, but like people thought they were werewolves.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But he didn't speak French, so the UK it was.
Indeed.
Helping him to make the decision, though, to set it at the UK was, at that time, the UK had something called the British Quota System, or the ED Plan. And this is something that we're familiar with, especially you, Joe, being a Canadian, but this was a tax incentive where the producer of a film would get a share of the box office for any films that were produced in the UK. And, of course, this was to encourage production in Great Britain, with the qualifier that there had to be a certain amount of Brits in the cast and crew. Again, Joe, I think Canada works, or at least worked similarly.
Yeah, it's a quota system, so you get points for how many crew members or additional content kind of things you have. It's the easiest way when you're not trying to make things about like a national identity. So this is like immediate things where you can say we had X many number of people in particular roles, and therefore that makes it a British production.
Well, I'm jumping ahead a bit here, but American Werewolf in London wound up being the last ED film before, in Landis's words, Margaret Thatcher drove a stake through the British film industry.
Nice. That old cold bitch. Yeah.
But anyway, but bear in mind, though, this is still 1969. This script was shelved for over a decade because everyone he took it to said, well, is it a horror movie or a comedy? Or they're like, well, this is a horror movie. Why is this funny? Or, hey, you're writing something funny. Why is there gore and scary stuff in here? And just no one understood the concept, I guess.
And shockingly enough, people still do not get the concept. So, relatable content.
Well, I think when it comes to marketing, I think we've discussed this, horror comedies are the hardest things to market because it's like, which audience are you going for?
Mm-hmm.
Cut to 1973, when Landis wrote, directed, and starred in his debut film, which cost $30,000. It was a film called Schlock. This film has developed a cult following, but Rick Baker was doing the effects in this film, so that's how we kind of met Rick Baker.
Okay.
But then throughout the 70s, we know John Landis' filmography. He would develop box office status in Hollywood through the successful comedy films Kentucky Fried Movie, Animal House, and then in 1980 with Blues Brothers. All of these films are very profitable, and now that he had some clout, he was able to revisit his script for An American Werewolf in London, which had been, off the shelf for 11 years.
Right.
So, enter producer George Folsey, and I only say this because he was actually an editor on all of Landis' early films, so Landis became close friends with him and while working on the Blues Brothers, and he was like, hey, I got clout, I want to make this movie. Read this script. I would love for you to produce this film with me. And Folsey read the script and was like, holy shit, this is awesome. Yes, I will totally throw in money for this.
Excellent.
Well, the Blues Brothers' massive success drew the attention of John Peters and Peter Guber. These two guys worked over at a company called Polygram Pictures. They read Landis' screenplay and they really liked it. They understood the combination of horror and comedy and agreed to co-fund the film with Universal Pictures. They said, we'll give you $10 million. And here's the thing. Landis, all over this documentary, is saying $10 million.
Mm-hmm.
Everywhere I found for the budget for this film was $5.8 million. But I know that Landis said he really wanted to come in under schedule and under budget with this film, which means I actually think $4 million of this budget went unused. Or maybe it was diverted to something like marketing or something.
Right.
That's kind of unheard of, no?
That is wild.
Absolutely.
But also, at this point in his career, this is still a bit of a big swing, right? Like, he's known principally for comedy, so I wonder if he really wanted to hit this out of the park, but also, come in under budget, under time, so that he could then say, oh, I'm going to make this very profitable like usual. That's why you need to continue giving me chances.
And it definitely was profitable, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Right.
But the time came for Landis to revisit the script, and the truth of the matter is that this script stayed pretty much exactly the same as it was when he wrote it in 1969. But there was one difference, and this difference is, so basically it's about the porno theater that takes up the climax of the film.
The climax. The climax of the film.
So basically, when he wrote the script in 1969, the porno theaters...
69.
Oh my god. Anyway, these things didn't exist. What they had instead were cartoon cinemas. And these things, they're in Piccadilly Circus. Parents would drop their kids off and go shopping in the streets and leave their kids to watch these beautiful 35mm prints of great cartoons.
Ooh.
Like, Tex Avery and things like that.
Right.
And John Landis would go here frequently when he was working on that war film in 1969. So it was a cartoon cinema. And so when they went to go make American Werewolf, those cartoon cinemas have become porno theaters.
So wait, do you think that means the original draft would have had a bunch of children getting killed in this theater?
I hope so. He does not say if that was the case or not.
I mean, here's the thing. I think that the sleazy, dirty movie theater actually works better, and in some ways is even more relatable to Americans, because to me, Piccadilly Circus looks very similar to Times Square. Mm-hmm. So the idea that we were going to dirty movie theaters in the late 70s, early 80s, it feels like an across-the-pond comparable thing.
Yeah. Absolutely. But the thing is, though, when it came to so when they're planning it, he's like, okay, well, we have to get a porno then to show on this screen. And so they watched a bunch of pornos, and Landis was like, I don't like any of this stuff. So what they watch in the final cut of this film, they actually shot themselves on the very first day of shooting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you can absolutely tell. I love that if you look at the end credits for this movie, the performers and the movie itself actually gets its own title.
Love it.
It's called See You Next Wednesday, by the way.
Of course.
What?
Oh,
I actually really like that.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that being in the subway scene. There's posters for that film.
Mm-hmm.
That's so funny. Where are they now? Where are they now?
Who knows? Honestly, the comedy in that porno was one of the funniest parts of that scene for me.
Oh my God, I love it. I don't even know you. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's so good. But okay, so checking in with Rick Baker really quick, because of course, this is an effects extravaganza of a film, which, going back to our discussion on why there aren't a lot of werewolf movies, I have to assume the cost of the effects of werewolves is why these don't get made as much as vampire films.
Well, I think that, and also my suggestion was you're going to try to put yours in comparison to something like this, and yours are probably not going to look as good, because you can do werewolves on a budget. It's just that people always want to talk about the transformation scene or how good the actual effects look. And I think a lot of people just go, ooh, I don't want to get compared to Rick Baker, so I don't want to do it.
I mean, honestly, I would take a complete Xerox copycat of the transformation scene in this movie and any ripoff over any of the lesser versions we get of this.
It's my homage, where I just try to replicate it as best I can.
Mm-hmm. But anyway, so Rick Baker had been Landis' first choice for the effects ever since he wrote that script in 1969. But by 1980, Baker had given up hope on this film ever actually happening, because it had been 10 or 11 years.
Right.
So one day, he gets a call from someone, a little man named Joe Dante. Joe Dante says, hey man, I'm making a werewolf movie called The Howling. I would love for you to do the effects on this film. And of course, he was like, oh yeah, absolutely, I'll do this. Sometime later, I have to assume it's days, weeks, maybe months, John Landis calls him and goes, hey, dude, I got $10 million for my werewolf movie. Let's do it. And Baker was like, oh
shit.
I'm doing Joe Dante's werewolf film, The Howling. And apparently Landis cussed him out a lot in a friendly way, but it was very much like, you fucking idiot. What are you doing?
We had a deal. We've talked about this for a decade.
Yes. And so Baker went to Joe Dante and was like, hey, I can't do this anymore, but it's okay. I'm going to give you my protege, Rob Bottin, because he also did your effects work on Piranha. But just in case, I will also stay on as a consultant, as a peace offering. So Baker did the effects for Werewolf in London. He was the man in charge, but he was also involved with The Howling still, if not in charge of those effects.
Which, P.S., if folks, I mean, I'm sure most people have seen The Howling, but just in case you haven't and you thought the effects in this movie were great, they're also really good in The Howling.
Well, and the thing is, too, The Howling comes out, I want to say about 6 months before An American Werewolf in London, but American Werewolf would go on to make 3 times as much money as The Howling.
Yeah, I'm curious, actually, Xero. Do you think that this is a more accessible text? Because I think that The Howling is a bit of a sleazier werewolf movie, whereas this, because of the mixture of horror and comedy, this one to me goes down easier.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was going to say, okay, The Howling next to Werewolf, both horny. The Howling is on a completely different level. The transformation scene, boy, I was in the theater sweating. Crazy. But obviously not everyone likes that much sex and provocative, nature in their movies.
Yeah.
It definitely takes a certain type of horror person. I think horror people in general are okay with sex, but the comedic aspect of American Werewolf in London, makes his audience super broad. So that's definitely why. I also do think American Werewolf in London is the better movie of the two.
It's been a while since I've seen The Howling. I've seen it probably 2 or 3 times, but is there any comedic bent in that movie, or is it pretty much a straightforward horror film?
From my eyes, no.
And which I actually find really interesting, because if you're talking about Joe Dante, that movie is sandwiched between, again, Piranha, which is a horror comedy, and Gremlins, which is also a horror comedy.
Yeah, I don't remember a ton of comedy in it either, so I'd be curious if we're all just kind of blocking it out or something. Folks, do let us know. But I wonder if that was Joe Dante saying, you know what, I've done horror comedy, let me dip my toe into straight horror, and then maybe when it doesn't work super well in terms... The Howling is still successful, but if you're looking at it in comparison to the other werewolf movie that comes out in the same time period and you get eclipsed, maybe you go back to horror comedy.
Yeah, I think, the one comedic bent I remember in The Howling is when that woman is going through the file cabinet and the werewolf hands her a file before attacking her. But again, that's almost more of a scare. The idea of it is funny, but it's presented very seriously.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's debatable, though. When you think about werewolf movies, especially as a horror fan, if you know, you know. But An American Werewolf in London and The Howling, those are the... with 2 E's, like Meg Thee Stallion, the werewolf movies.
Right.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. At least from this time period. Maybe it's weird, right? The best werewolf movies from the 80s both come out in 1981. So, any other movie that comes out that decade is fucked.
Yeah.
But yeah, so filming took place between February and March of 81. So actually, this was filming when The Howling came out.
Okay.
But director John Landis wanted the film to take place during poor weather. That's why he chose that time period, which I'm assuming has to do with the weather and the moors.
Right.
Filming went as I said, they came in under budget, under schedule. Everything went very, very swimmingly. But the issues came in post-production, because they did have a lot of problems with the censors, who had concerns less with the violence and more so with the nudity in the film.
Oh my God.
There are at least 2 times it's if you pause it just right, you can see his penis.
Wait, what? I gotta go back. Hold on.
Oh, yeah, there are 2 full shots of
what? Who was looking? What? Yes.
I got my magnifying glass out.
There were just a couple of times where I was he's trying to cover his dick, but it is swinging.
Swinging in, full breeze in the wind. But nevertheless, they did not like the sex scene in this film. So they had to cut out a lot of footage of the sex scene.
Which is wild, because it's still very long.
Right? But it's a lot of, close-ups of backs, I feel like. There's no thrusting. There's not a ton of thrusting in this scene.
No. Hellraiser
Can I say
would never.
Something controversial, maybe? I thought this was a terrible sex scene.
Oh, it's not hot.
It's not hot at all. I don't think it really fits. It doesn't... I hate to be the person that's it doesn't add anything to the story, because I'm also one of the bitches that's just I'll watch anything, put it in there. I don't give a fuck. But my eyebrows were coming down closer together. I didn't think that it wasn't hot. It wasn't at the right time. The music that they threw behind it was also super cringe. I was just really not feeling that sex scene. The porno theater, absolutely.
Right.
I think it's more for me the execution of the sex scene more than the inclusion of the sex scene itself. And I do wonder if the execution of it was hurt by the edits they had to make to appease the censors, because I do think it's important to show that Alex is immediately jumping into bed with this guy, and so that shows how much she cares for him, which to me sells their romance even more, to where again, the final shot of this movie I think is devastating, and I do think the sex scene adds to that for me personally.
Yeah, you have to believe in the affair, and you have to believe that it's happening rather quickly, because, of course, by the time we're leaving the hospital, he's only got, 2 days until he's going to transform. So we do need to kind of ramp things up. But I do agree with you, Xero. I don't think the sex scene really works, and I would be curious to know if it is, we had to trim it so much, because the footage we do get it's not even just that it's not very sexy. It's just that it's almost a question mark of, wait, what are we doing with this? Like, I've seen TV drama shoot better sex scenes than this. It's really just not Landis's forte.
Well, on top of the sex, they also had issues with some of the violence, but the main thing was when we first meet Jack's ghost, he asks for a piece of toast from David, and I guess there's a part where a piece of toast falls out of his throat, so that had to get cut out.
Oh no, that's such a cute gag.
Yeah, well, I looked to see, because I have this bonkers 4K set that Xero put out, and there weren't even deleted scenes on it, so I was like, oh, so I guess they cut it, and it's like, bam, in the garbage.
Right. I guess we weren't keeping things.
Yeah, but nevertheless, there were still some other issues they had. And so once they got rid of, like, they cut the sex scene, they cut the toast out. And then Landis goes, okay, wait. Look, give me like a week or a week and a half, and I'll address your changes, and I'll show you a new cut of the film. They waited 10 days. They made no changes, showed the censor board the exact same movie, and they were like, much better.
They didn't even know. That's why censor boards are such fucking bullshit.
There is one thing that Landis cut that wasn't a censor thing. So basically, it's the sequence where the unhoused people are murdered by the werewolf, those 3 men. In the original cut, there's a part where you can see the wolf grab the head of one of these men and pull him out of the shot. Then he's thrown back in, and it's very violent and very shocking. In the first 2 preview screenings they held for the film, one in New York City, one in Chicago, Landis was there. And the audience was so shocked and stunned by it that they would not stop talking and laughing for the next 5 minutes of the film and missed a lot of exposition. And so Landis was like, well, I don't want that. So he cut it.
Wild. That is so interesting, because to me, that scene, like that particular part of the film, is actually a little bit muted. And I find that what comes afterwards with the businessman in the subway, like in the tube, is so effective. I mean, I could definitely understand why Landis would want people to be paying attention to that, because that's your big reveal.
Yeah, but he does regret cutting out that bit with the unhoused people today. But I agree. I think the best shot in the movie is the one from the top of the escalator.
Oh,
yep. I'm right there with you.
So fucking good. That whole part. Yeah. Oh, just so good.
Fantastic. But nevertheless, they got a final cut, so bam, we're good. The movie was released in theaters on August 21st, 1981. It grossed $30 million in the box office in the States, and another $32 million worldwide, so a $62 million worldwide gross against a budget of under $6 million. Yeah.
But money, baby.
Shockingly, it didn't get particularly good reviews when it came out. Like, actually, if you were looking at the Wikipedia page for at the time, it would say mixed to negative response when it came out.
What?
Right.
Yeah, so, but of course, it's considered a classic today, but yeah, the same things are being said. John Landis can't decide what movie he wants to make, a comedy or a horror film. Not both. That's not a possible thing.
Oh, no.
But like you said earlier, Joe, some people didn't also think that he knew what story he was trying to tell. Some people thought the movie didn't end. It does end. It just ends. There's not an ending to the film.
Well, nothing is going to be satisfying because the story is done. Like, what, do we want to follow Alex as she grieves or something? No.
Oh my God, that's hysterical, actually.
I mean, no offense to this actress, but Alex is probably one of the worst women in a horror film. Like, no, what? I think she's lovely, but this is such an underwritten character. I think it's the actress bringing everything to this role, but this is not a good character.
Man, we've actually covered one of her films before, Joe. Do you know what we've seen her in?
What have we seen her in?
She's the foster mother of Andy in Child's Play 2.
What?
And you want to talk a useless woman character in a horror movie?
Wow. We got no time for parents in Child's Play, though.
But yeah. But nevertheless, the film is considered a classic today. We've got an 89% on Rotten Tomatoes with an average score of 7.8 out of 10.
That is too low. Too low.
It's so close to a 4. I think I wound up giving this a 4.5, though, because I don't know, by the time it ended, I think my jaw was just on the floor, where I was like, oh, right, it just ends right here. And it's really effective.
The ending goes so fucking hard.
Oh, yeah. And I forgot all about that Piccadilly Circus stuff. But Letterboxd users have given this a 7.7 out of 10. And, also, I guess I should mention, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, aka the Academy, decided to create the Best Makeup Award the year this movie came out, and an American Werewolf in London, Rick Baker, won the very first Oscar for Best Makeup.
Yeah, he fucking did.
The film is credited, though, with inspiring a wave of comedy horror films like Gremlins, like Evil Dead 2, like Beetlejuice, and Edgar Wright, director of Shaun of the Dead, said that it was a major inspiration for his own filmmaking. And I actually thought about this, too, because I do think you can see, like, the juggling of, like, really funny with very serious horror. I think Shaun of the Dead does that really well, like, the closest out of any of those films to this film.
Interesting. That's actually another good challenge to put out to listeners, because I would love to know which films they think have the best balance between the comedy and the horror. But I would also say the genuine heart, because that is the other component that really sells this movie. If you don't actually care about David's plight, I don't think it will work as well for you.
I think that's why I was so surprised that David Naughton, didn't become more of a name actor after this, because I think he gives a really good performance in this movie.
And he's adorable.
Yeah.
Oh, so cute.
Last thing before I turn it over to you, Joe. So there was also a kinda sorta sequel released to this film in 1997 called An American Werewolf in Paris Represent. I think it's really fun. It's silly, but it's very fun.
Joe said,
I think I've seen parts of it, but I don't remember it well. I've actually listened to a couple of our, brother and our friends cover it on their podcast, and it does sound quite a bit more silly. I think what I remember most is that the special effects are more CGI and not super good. So I think people, they hold them in comparison and say, well, you got one of the all-time practical effects films, and then you've got dodgy CGI from the 90s, and I think it hurts that sequel.
It doesn't have a good reputation. It had a completely different cast and crew from this one. It was distributed by Disney's Hollywood Pictures. It was poorly received by critics. It flopped hard at the box office, but the fun fact, I did not know this. So Polygram, the company that helped fund the first film, started the project, and they asked Landis, hey, write a screenplay for this sequel to American Werewolf in London. He turned in a draft that focused on Debbie Klein, a character mentioned, but never seen or heard in this film. But yeah, it's the one that they talk, the girl from their hometown, right?
The sexy childhood friend?
Yes. So it centered on her getting a job in London and her subsequent investigation into the deaths of David and Jack. And then several characters from this film, including Alex Price, Dr. Hirsch, Sergeant McManus, would return, but the studio turned down the script. And Polygram Pictures still wanted to do the sequel, but Landis, unwilling to write a second treatment, told them to just make the sequel without him.
Wow.
Whoa. But also would have watched that fucking movie.
Yes!
Oh my God,
absolutely!
in a heartbeat.
Like, that would have been like a true legacy sequel, right?
But I love it because you're bringing in a character nobody knows anything about, really, except for what we've heard people casually talk about. It gives you almost a carte blanche to kind of restart everything, and then you just bring in your utility players to goose it up.
So, I don't know. I think American Werewolf in Paris is a very fun movie. It is nowhere near the level of this movie, but like late 90s, like werewolf CGI schlock with a wild-ass soundtrack absolutely hits a spot.
I remember the Bush song from that movie, so...
But, Joe, what happens in this movie?
All right. So I have two sources that I'm going to reference throughout this. I've got Marissa Mercurio's piece, Queer Moon Rising, The Love of a Good Woman Won't Save You, Queer Narratives in an American Werewolf in London, as well as Matt Geiger's The Secret Queer Subtext of an American Werewolf in London. And ironically enough, they make almost identical points. So even if I'm referencing one, you can find nearly the same commentary in the other piece. So I know we're going to get a ton of pushback from people saying this movie's not queer in the slightest. Hey, you're wrong, and that's okay. But it's interesting that people seem to be very firmly aligned in where the queerness lies in this text.
Interesting. So I also will be pulling something from this, but it's not going to be a queer reading. It's going to be a Jewish reading. And this is being pulled from John Spira's visual essay on this Arrow set. It's called I Think He's a Jew, The Werewolf's Secret. So I will also be pulling from that throughout this plot summary.
Okay, nice. So we begin with the first of many covers of Blue Moon. The first one is done by Bobby Vinton, and this is playing...
They wanted to get Bob Dylan's cover of Blue Moon, but he had recently become a born-again Christian and refused to let them use it.
Damn.
Honestly, then, you know what? I know that we sometimes seem like we come down really hard on religion on the podcast. I like to think we've done better over the last 5.5 years. But every time somebody's like, I won't do a horror movie because I'm religious, I'm just like, okay. So we've got this song playing over scenic shots of the Yorkshire moors, and it's gorgeous. It kind of makes you want to go there, except it does look very chilly and a little bit wet. And then we come in at a deserted country intersection as traveling companions, in quotation marks, David, played by David Naughton, as well as Jack, played by Griffin Dunn, are warned by the sheep farmer that they've been traveling with that they need to stay out of the moors.
And just right off the bat, we have to establish these are two Jewish men in this movie. And Spiro does say there's an overt Jewishness to the film, given the fact that both Jack Goodman and David Kessler are Jewish men, given their last names. When they insult each other, they use Jewish projections like putz. This is a more kind of general look at the film, and I'll go into details later, but he does say, when broken down, the film can be viewed as the story of a man equipped only by his wit, if not his wits, in a country that neither understands nor particularly wants him. He has seen his best friend murdered and does his best to get along, despite feeling immense guilt and self-hatred, knowing what he is inside, which was a great comparison of how the modern Jew can feel.
Right. And you could also extrapolate that to, say, the modern queer.
Yes! I think we're going to link up a lot in this, Joe.
Well, I mean, I'm curious, Xero, because I know that you traveled a little bit as well, but one of my favorite things in horror films is how you can almost lay over horror sequences based on the experience of feeling like you don't belong in this country or you don't understand how it works, like you're not entirely welcome. And I love that it's really, like, it's laid out in the fucking title. It's an American Werewolf in London.
I think what's great about horror in general, not to make this conversation like super broad, but what's great about the genre in general is that it demonstrates pretty on point how it feels to be just a marginalized person in general. And that could be communicated through how it feels to be a queer person in upstate New York, like in My Animal. It could be how it feels to be, you know, your typical American in London, how it could be, you know, as a Jewish person in a predominantly Christian society. Just the feeling of alienation is something that drives horror really consistently and pretty often. So you can sub those things out pretty easily and seamlessly in horror in general, which is why I think marginalized people in general gravitate towards the genre so heavily.
Right.
And then also, you know, you can have the specifics, which I do love, all of the fun Jewish quips that come with this movie. But, you know, I could easily switch them out for something that's easily known in the queer community or in the brown community. And it would make just as much sense. But the feeling of alienation is that one thing that really stays. But, you know, it could be, you could make it into something that's relatable for everyone.
Yeah, I think one of the things that works for me about these two characters is that their relationship feels so lived in. So even if you're not picking up on the Jewishness because you don't necessarily get those references, like at one point they make it very explicit, you know, they reference their Jewishness. But I think but I think even if you're not picking up on it, there's something about their experience as foreigners in another land that is going to be pretty relatable. Like it's a universal experience, but then you can dial into it increasingly more depending on how you identify. So I like how this movie makes itself available to a broad swath of audiences. Okay, so we're walking down the road. We are talking about Debbie. and how Jack has sexual prospects with her if they should ever meet up again. And then dusk starts to creep in, and we are cutting across the fields before we arrive in East Proctor at the one and only pub, The Slaughtered Lamb.
This is... Okay, have y'all ever had an experience where you walk into a place and everyone stops and looks at you? Because this feels like a very queer experience to me.
All we needed was a record scratch, right? Well, it's funny, Trace, because I realized this is a second text in only a couple of weeks where somebody walks into a bar and everybody just stops because this exact same thing happened 2 weeks ago in The Invisible Man.
The Invisible Man. Yep.
That's very funny. But yeah, so this is what happens. They walk in, we've got this boisterous crowd, and they immediately take note, hey, these are outsiders in our small community. They do not fit in. So there's a lot of comedy here where the two boys are cold. They want food. They want heat. They want anything at all. And basically, we've got this barmaid who is played by Lila Kay, and she offers them no comfort, no warmth, no satisfaction.
I guess, I don't know, did y'all pick up on any commentary between, like, you know, like what, like, this is not city folk, right? These are country folk. I mean, that's what the Yorkshire Moors are, right? It's like the countryside of London. But I was surprised, I guess there wasn't more, I don't know, more commentary between how the city folk think of these people. We get a little bit of it with Villiers when he walks in, but it's not really hammered in there.
I definitely took it to be, you will protect the members of your own community, whether that's to keep other people from finding out your secrets or refusing to go and help other people. So this does feel like a little bit of condemnation on country folk. Like I was getting a little bit of rural horror vibes from this.
Right. Oh, so like the Brits version of what an American hillbilly is.
Kind of, yeah. Like, is this the UK version of Appalachia?
Maybe.
This is what it feels like when, all right, I'm from downstate, okay? I'm from New York City, and I have a homegirl who moved up to Syracuse. And I went up there to visit her during the lockdown because, you know, we didn't have shit else to do.
Right.
And the feeling went, well, first of all, there's nothing to do up there. There might as well have been some moors for me to walk around during a full moon.
Xero, come on, you go antiquing, right?
So I go to the grocery store with a couple of friends of mine, and we're immediately pinned as downstaters. And it's kind of the same way downstate, like when somebody from upstate comes into the city, you know, they're walking slow. They're probably fumbling with, can I pay with card? No, you can't. They stick out like a sore thumb. And it feels like how these two guys feel walking into a bar, and then the only thing you're missing is really the record scratch.
Yeah.
Soundbite playing, because everyone already knows that you are the outlier. That shit is strong.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, good on them for trying to make a go of it. Unfortunately, we just keep stepping in it, you know, hey, what's that pentangle 5-point star on the wall? Let's ask the guy who's playing chess about it, who is played by Brian Glover. And I actually had in my notes, I had his name written as Joker because he seems to be the person who's starting all the jokes. Everybody laughs with him. But we've also got this dart player played by David Schofield. And as soon as we get a second kind of record scratch when they ask, hey, what's with the deal with the candles and the pentagram? Like, are you basically summoning the devil or witches or something? You know, okay, we've been here for 5 minutes. We gave it a try. It's time to go.
Yeah, give it up.
It's just not working.
I feel like they knew not to ask about the candles. They knew not to ask candles because I don't remember who says it to who, but one of them was like, you ask, you know, what's the candles about? Because it's kind of, you know, we already can tell that this is tight-knit society. They have their own inside jokes that are apparently hilarious because you say one thing and then the whole tavern just bursts out laughing. So they probably have their own rules of what's okay and what not okay to ask, especially because all we did was ask for some tea and now we got this crazy attitude from the bartender. I don't really understand.
Yeah.
But I think that they kind of knew that these were not the questions that we should really be poking around with. But of course, you got to start somewhere.
Well, that's the thing, though, because do y'all think that they are behaving like this because they're quote unquote outsiders, or because they're like, fuck, there's a werewolf out there, what are we gonna do? Or both?
It could be a little bit of both.
I'm gonna say outsiders.
Yeah, I think it veers more outsiders here, and then later on when Dr. Hirsch comes in, it's definitely more, we're freaked out by being questioned, somebody maybe uncovering our secrets about the werewolf, but also outsiders, get the fuck out.
I guess it's just because whenever they do leave, some of them are like, we can't let them go out there on their own, and then, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too generous.
I think you're being a little generous because it's only the barmaid. It's only the woman who says we can't let them go out there by themselves. Right. Shouldn't we do something? Somebody go after them. And all the men just kind of say, mm-mm. And it's either, no, we're not going to help those queers, Jews, outsiders, or we're not putting our necks on the line for anybody.
Well, because also, we don't know much about the werewolf that gets killed in a bit, but I have to believe it's one of their own.
Why do you assume that, though?
Because it stays around this area, I guess. I mean, unless this man just lives in the woods, I am assuming, from no information the film is giving me, that he would normally be in this slaughtered lamb on any other night of the week.
I mean, we do hear from the dart player later that they consider the area cursed. And obviously it could just be because this is where werewolves seem to gravitate to, or that they've had this recent incident where one of their own was infected. And I love that the movie doesn't give us any kind of reassurance, oh yeah, it started here. Here's the mythology. There's no backstory. This film doesn't want to give you any of that. So yeah, I mean, Trace, I called you out for assuming it, but the reality is the film doesn't give us any information.
Oh, I mean, by all means, I didn't even take it as a call out. I just that's just my brain filling in blanks that the film is leaving for me.
I think it's better that way. I mean, in my opinion, I think as nerds, again, I'm going with the general, but as nerds, I think we're so obsessed with understanding everything and the lore and how we got here and what happens afterwards and the details of it all, when I really don't think that's completely necessary for good storytelling.
I
think sometimes it works better in a bubble.
Right.
And then we can, make our own assumptions within that. And I don't really think it matters if that's the truth or if it's not, in the grand scheme of things. If we're talking Star Wars, sure, the details matter. But for something like this, that's kind of just a general story about this guy he got fucked up real bad. And now he's got to, he's got to live with it. He's got to figure out how to make terms with what he's about to go through. I think that's all we really need to know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that controversial of me to say?
No, not at all.
I don't think so, because as you were speaking, Xero, I was thinking if this movie had been made, let's say even 15 years later, we probably would have given it an immediate sequel. We probably would have greenlit Landis's original idea. But if it had been made about 25 years later, we probably would be getting some kind of origin story. Or, this would tell an origin story, like, where did the beast come from? Let's track its first victims. And I love that this movie just says, no, we're just dropping you in the middle of these two men's experience. If you don't fully understand what's going on, it's because they don't either. That's an integral part of the story.
Right.
So I'm actually appreciative of not getting more of these details, because I do think it's kind of fun to speculate.
Well, also, we've got a tight 97-minute runtime on this movie, which I quite appreciate.
Perfect.
I always remember it being nearly 2 hours, and then I hit play and I go, oh my sweet baby Jesus, thank you, God.
I think it was a thing during the porno theater scene. I was like, there's only 10 minutes left of this movie.
Yeah, when we hit the accelerator, when we hit the gas, this movie motors.
Yeah.
Insert any other metaphor for moving quickly. Okay, so yes, the boys decide that they're going to leave. They're given the same advice as what the sheep farmer gave them, which is stick to the road, avoid the moors, and beware of the full moon. Can't really do much about that last one when you're actually kicking us out of the bar, but sure. So we go outside. It starts to rain. we inadvertently wander off the road into the moors. We start to get
we
lost.
Immediately disregard the road.
But I love that they're so caught up in their own drama, where they're taking playful jabs at each other. They're already thinking ahead to why didn't we go to somewhere nicer? And it's like, oh, we didn't even realize we were doing all of the things that they told us not to do. And that's when the howling and the growling begins.
Ooh, and see, I would love to. I don't have a surround sound system kicked up, but I would love to see this in a theater so I want to know, because when you hear some surround sound stuff and it's like, the sound's coming from different speakers around you.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that would make this scene even more effective than it already is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a good sound system would really amplify this scene, particularly because Landis is relying entirely on sound. It's the actors in the dark, and we're told, oh, it sounds like it's coming from over there, and we change directions. Oh, it sounds like it's right ahead of us. It's like we're using our imagination, but he's not showing it to us. So I think the sound design could play a huge role here.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, Jack gets very badly mauled and dies. I do want to note, and I don't think I ever realized it until this rewatch, David fully abandons him.
Oh, well, he does come back. It's one of those things. What were we talking about a couple weeks ago with Personal Shopper, Joe, where Kristen Stewart discovers that body and then she leaves on her scooter, realizes what she's doing, and drives back. That's exactly what David does here. Because I think ultimately, yes, while it's your best friend is here getting killed, your first instinct, your fight or flight is fly away.
Get the fuck out of here.
And survive.
I kind of like it. I think it's real.
Yeah.
This is the first time in this movie, because it did happen a couple times for me, where I thought, well, that's a really realistic choice. You want to say, even though that's your best homie, that's your dude, I'm going to stick beside him no matter what. We're backpacking through London together. But when shit goes down, I'm out of here. It's really fight or flight. It's adrenaline and I'm out, which I think is a really unfortunately, I would love to say that my best friends would stick by my side while I'm getting mauled by, a supernatural being. But I'm going to be real. They're going to run.
Right.
Maybe feel bad about it later.
I wouldn't blame anyone, honestly. I don't think I would blame anyone. I'd be like, what? I get it.
It's real. What the fuck is that? Is it a wolf? Is it a man? You never fucking know. But that was the first time in this movie where I'm like, okay, that was a real person decision. And then we go on in the movie to the tussle, the fight with himself. What am I going to do? Is this real? Is this not? Which is also a super real thing. Who's going to sit down and be like, you know what? I know what I have to do. This is all real, and I got to do it.
I think that all goes back to the origin of the story, right? Like John Landis saying, "Hey, well, how would a real person react if they saw a body crawl out of the grave and reanimate?" And I think that's such a good way to take horror films. I mean, I don't mind horror films that are kind of set in these heightened realities where these things do exist and people are aware of them. But I find it more fascinating and relatable, obviously, when they are set firmly in the real world with unreal outside circumstances.
Right. And so much of the conflict in this film, as you alluded to, Xero, is based on this. Okay, well, what do I actually know? How much do I want to believe? How much do I want to believe I, a real person, am caught up in something supernatural? That's what's driving a lot of the plot and the character motivation in this movie. So it makes perfect sense. It's just almost novel to see a flawed character. This is our protagonist and we want him to be a hero, but the reality is he's a scared post-grad who encounters something really fucking scary in the dark, sees some bad shit go down on his friend, and takes off. Yeah, we've all said it. It's relatable stuff.
Well, and I actually like that he's not just some big macho hero dude. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just tying this back in. He feels like a real human being.
And to be clear, he does go back because he realizes, what the fuck am I doing? I need to help my friend. But if he hadn't, he would have gotten out of this movie unscathed. It's because he goes back. He gets scratched. And then, the villagers finally show up. They do their thing. And this person dies. We never know who it is, but we see it's a human being. But because he goes back, David ends up getting infected with this curse. It propagates and we start the clock. He's got a month to live.
So basically, don't be a fucking hero.
Don't be a hero.
I love it's like
This
he's got a
and
month to
Feast.
live. I love that it's like he's got a month to live, and then it's 3 weeks later.
3 weeks later. Because you know what? He also got fucked up by this thing. It's like he barely got out of this alive, so he needs time to recuperate, which is another realistic thing this movie does. He doesn't just heal from these things overnight. He needs 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Yeah.
All right, so he wakes up in the hospital. We are introduced to Nurse Susan Gallagher, who is played by Anne-Marie Davies, and she does not give a fuck about anything that's going on. I love this. She's a terrible nurse.
Yeah. So I will bring in Spira again here, because obviously, from a Jewish perspective, this scene draws a lot of thought.
Mm-hmm.
Spira says, I think he's a Jew paints a portrait of modern anti-Semitism.
Right.
So everyone, in case you haven't seen the movie, what happens is this nurse just says, I think he's a Jew, insinuating that she's already checked his penis to see if he was circumcised.
Oh.
Spira says, 2 important lines. I think he's a Jew suggests subterfuge. The white-skinned Jew, unlike Jews with other ethnicities, can move about in Western society undetected, and some people don't like that. The Jew not only has the temerity to be foreign, but also to do so unrecognizably. Alex's response to the nurse, what makes you say that, is not a condemnation, but a request for verification, whereas the appropriate response should have been, so what if he is? Why is that important? Is that a problem for you? But rather, the reprimand that follows for this nurse is for a professional impropriety, rather than making an issue of his ethnicity. And the most casual common occurrence of anti-Semitism is the implication that we meaning Jews, are getting away with fooling people, that we are not what we appear to be. Wolves in sheep's clothing, if you will, which also might be why we are introduced to David and Jack in the bed of a sheep truck covered in sheep.
Right.
The subtext explores the modern history of the Jewish experience, the emotional landscape of the Jewish diaspora, and the everyday experience of casual anti-Semitism, all baked into a simple line of dialogue.
Yeah.
That shit was powerful.
Yeah.
Dang.
Because it would be really easy for people to look at this scene and say, this is a very unusual character. Like, why do we have this nurse in here who makes this comment? She shows up one other time. Basically, she's here just to be chastised by Dr. Kirsch, who's about to come in and say, you know, like, you suck at your job, get the fuck out of here.
Right.
But it plays into this idea that there's multiple ways of moving through the world, and some people look at them as, oh, you're trying to hide something and I find it threatening. I either want to call it out, I want to get away from you, or I maybe want to kill you.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of Dr. Hirsch, he's played by John Woodvine, and he comes in, he sees Nurse Gallagher, he gets rid of her because she's useless. So he allows Nurse Alex Price, who is played by Jenny Agutter, who is going to be our female romantic love interest. He notes that she's a bit more competent, so he gets her to stay. And this scene is primarily just to introduce the two characters who are going to be important in the narrative apart from David going forward. But essentially, this is also confirmation. Oh yeah, Jack, he did.
I actually really like the Dr. Hirsch character in this movie because I think when he's introduced, you expect him to be a foil for... Yeah. And I like that he gets involved in the investigation and believes in it as things start to happen. So I thought that was a very a subversive way to portray a medical professional in a horror film.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've had a number of conversations in Xero. I know you and Sheree have had a number on Blurry Massacre about, like, the depiction of mental health and how it plays into horror films and that kind of stuff. But I like that this movie doesn't call David crazy, but as we accumulate scientific evidence that he might be ill, you know, it becomes get him to the hospital where we can treat him, not turn him over to the police where we can imprison him.
Yeah. I mean, okay, well, first of all, that was bars, Joe. That is. I actually never thought about how this movie could actually say a lot about being believed, especially in medical situations. Because I know that is a thing for marginalized people just in general. Being taken seriously.
Yep.
How mentally sound you might appear, especially after something crazy traumatic has happened. And so, yeah, I also do appreciate the fact that, you know, this doctor is actually willing to listen after we had that really weird kind of SAE instance of anti-Semitism that just happened.
Yeah.
And, you know, just not to mention the fact that dude is claiming to be, you know, attacked by something that definitely wasn't listed in the report. It never really occurred to me, but now that I'm thinking about it, that's a whole nother message that I think should be stronger in this film. I mean, I don't know why I didn't get it upon the first or second watch even, but that does make a lot of sense. And also just pairs up very nicely to the feelings of being alienated or being the only one person in the room who looks like you or has your certain background or, you know, your physical ailments or mental ailments. Same themes. Mm-hmm.
So it's important that we stay in this sort of space for a little bit. So we do get a brief POV, which we will learn is David dreaming where he's running through the woods naked. But when he wakes up and realizes that Jack is dead, to me, this is the first big symptom that the bond between the two men was more than just a little bit friendship, because he is utterly hysterical about the death of Jack.
Which feels so real, right?
Sure. And obviously people can say, that's a bit of a reach. That doesn't necessarily make him queer. But the devastation that he feels over the loss of his friend, to me, feels like this was the most important person in the world to me.
Well, but I think it is tying in his guilt, because I still, you know, that moment where he left him, where he's like, maybe I could have saved him. I think that's weighing over him. But sure. I still think that feeds into a queer reading.
I guess there's also an interesting level of almost performative masculinity, because we're also introduced to Mr. Collins, who is played by Frank Oz.
What?
Yep, I know. I don't recognize it, but I recognize the name, and I'm always just like, oh, right, okay.
Well, and that's why we have shots of the Muppets in this movie, too.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah.
But, you know, the interesting thing about Mr. Collins, so he's there as the representative from the U.S. Embassy, because, of course, these are, you know, we had an international incident on foreign soil, technically, and he seems almost embarrassed by how hysterical David is acting. You can tell he almost wants him to just man up and be okay with it. You know, we'll fix it, we'll ship you home, and it'll be okay. And David will not be consoled, to the point where Mr. Collins just leaves. So Dr. Hirsch, you know, listens to his story where David says, well, I was attacked by a wolf. And of course, this is where we learn, oh, well, the locals all said that you were just attacked by a lunatic and we shot him. We dealt with him. This case is over, which is something that will be repeated when we're introduced to Inspector Villiers, who is played by Don McKillop, as well as Sergeant McManus, who is played by Paul Kember. But first, we have to get wacky comedic hijinks in the office.
Oh, okay.
The kidney
the guy
bowls.
Spilling all the metallic trays.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can see a critic watching this and being like, why is this in here? And the fact of the matter is, it's because it's funny. It's just a gag.
So funny. It's cringe comedy. Because, of course, this is wholly inappropriate. Like, we're talking about a traumatized man, maybe a murder. He's either lost his mind or people are lying. And instead it's like, oh, I gotta pick up these bowls. I just keep dropping shit.
It's just, again, it's a thing where it's like, it doesn't need to be in this movie. It doesn't add anything to the plot of this movie, but it does add really to the humor of this movie.
Yeah. So
I also think that this could be just a good break, which is, I think, super important when you're watching horror comedy. It's really not going to work because the highs have to balance out the lows. And this scene actually does make sense to me because we're just coming off of a time, which honestly, after this discussion, I'm now realizing is a lot deeper than I thought upon my first two watches. But, you know, to combat that really awkward moment, well, actually several awkward moments. We have the weird instance of kind of anti-Semitism. Then we have this pressure from being interrogated because, you know, this is kind of a big deal. It was a murder on international soil. yada, yada, yada. This is some real heavy stuff, which means, you know, in the vein of horror comedy, it's time for an ad break. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well, I like that thought, Xero, because honestly, thinking about it, we've talked about horror comedies, and I feel like generally most horror comedies tend to lean heavier onto the comedy than the horror. So we have gore, but we're not really trying to scare people in a horror comedy. Again, generally speaking, it's not a widespread rule.
No, and here, let's do another werewolf example, because we've got from a couple years ago, Werewolves Within, right?
Yes.
Which you would definitely say far more comedic than it is horror.
But I think, so talking about those breaks that you're talking about, Xero, I think it does a really good job of disarming the audience, because again, if you're watching a horror comedy, this one specifically really goes all in on the horror part of it and is trying to scare you. I think it actually, having these breaks of comedy makes the movie scarier, because you're never quite sure when the movie is going back into horror territory.
Right.
Hard agree.
It's a soft reset.
Yes, exactly. So you're constantly being disarmed by the comedy, whereas if this was tension straight throughout, you would always be on edge, which again, some movies, that's what they want, and that's totally fine. It works. But this film does the opposite, where it's like, no, we're going to give you a break, and then you're never going to know when we're going back into horror territory again. You don't know when it's safe again.
Right. Well, that's interesting. Actually, let's keep this in mind when we get to one of David's later nightmares about the Nazi demons.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll have more to say about that.
I'm sure. Okay, yes. So Inspector Villiers indicates the case is closed. We're not investigating it anymore. We basically sewn it up. It's fine. And then we do get another dream sequence where David is leaping through the woods naked, and he ends up grabbing a deer and just ripping it apart.
So we've got a lot of dream sequences in this film, and I gotta say, are we okay with the amount of dream? Because a lot of these also build up to a jump scare.
Right. Xero, what do you think of these?
I think we could maybe have one less.
Okay.
I wasn't even coming in with a particular angle per se. I remember when I watched this, I was kind of like, wow, we're doing a lot of dream fake outs. But again, I almost think they're priming you for that Nazi one where it's a double dream within a dream where you don't expect it happening. So they are almost serving a purpose. But even though, I agree, Xero, I'm kind of like, do we need another dream sequence?
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's there just to reinforce this idea that even if he consciously hasn't accepted that he's going to become a werewolf subconsciously, like in his dreams, he's already moving in that direction. The curse is already working on him. Now, whether or not we need two of these is a question mark. I guess it's establishing a bit of a pattern of behavior. But, I mean, I think they're fine. I don't know if we lose that much by removing them. Whatever. It's okay.
Yeah.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
So we then get another sort of slight moment. We need to start building up Alex. I'm using not scare quotes, not air quotes, but I'm not really believing what I'm saying when I say we need to build Alex up, because I don't think actually we know much about her at all. But we see her go to the children's ward, and she interacts with this Sebastian boy who only says no to every single thing that she asks.
Yeah, he's a real adorable.
He's cute and obnoxious at the same time, like a real child. Let's be real, folks. But I do think it's important that she's got this moment where she basically can't get this little boy to do anything for her. And then she goes to David, and it's the exact same situation, only with a grown-ass man, because he refuses to eat because he's not hungry. And she ends up spoon-feeding him like either a mother figure or like a fucking adult with a child.
She's like, I'm not doing this shit again. Eat. I mean, the moment where she pinches his nose to make him open his mouth, again, it's like she's coddling him. She's infantilizing him.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we do get a brief jump scare where once again, David imagines, it's a nightmare. He imagines that he is about to grab her with the yellow eyes.
Demon face, yeah.
It's okay.
Again, it's a jump scare. It's so quick because as soon as we get the reveal of the face, which I feel like also I had seen this still image of this makeup on him before I'd ever seen the movie. And I think if you just saw this screenshot out of context, you would never guess it was from this particular movie.
Right, yeah, this is Demons.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking, yeah. Which is not to say it's bad, but...
No, it's fine. It's fine. Just like, it comes out of nowhere, which I guess is the point.
Yeah. So we are using these opportunities to also bring Dr. Hirsch more into the fold, right? So David won't stop talking about werewolves, about the wolf that attacked Jack and so on. And Dr. Hirsch is listening, He encourages David to maintain his grip on sanity because he will be discharged from the hospital in a couple of days. But you can tell... the fact that David won't let it go is ringing some kind of alarm bell in Dr. Hirsch, and he's not writing it off completely. He does, however, send Nurse Alex to go and spend the night with David, so she ends up sitting by his bed and reading to him. And I mean, I'm not going to talk about propriety on the job, but also this feels like we're overstepping boundaries from nurse into full-blown, hey, you should go fuck that guy later.
Maybe that's just how they did it in Britain in the 1980s.
You know what? We go full service with our nursing over here. Okay. Yeah, so David wakes up and, he's still a bit of a cad, so he immediately comments on how hot she is, and this is when she reads to him. And then we move into the Nazi demon nightmare. But of course, we don't know that's what it is right off the bat.
Well, because we immediately start, and we have a family watching The Muppet Show, doing a Punch and Judy puppet show. We've never seen this family. Do we see David in this scene before the attack happens?
We see him at the very end. Oh, sorry. Okay. He said he's seated at the table, but the focus is not on him. So it's easy to forget that he's even here. But then one of the demons holds, the knife to his throat.
Yeah. That I knew. I should know if we saw it before the actual attack happened. This definitely comes out of nowhere. And Spira says, it's actually a shorter piece, but he does say, the most Jewish part of the film is the infamous Nazi dream sequence. You can also see a menorah on the mantelpiece to emphasize the family's Jewishness. Right. This is, and he says, the most perfect distillation of the anxiety of the modern Jew. The closest thing to capture this is the wedding scene from Fiddler on the Roof, when a happy ceremony is interrupted by, get out of here, Jews. And I love that, though, because, it's what is your worst nightmare? It's that a bunch of monster Nazis come and wipe out your entire family.
Yeah. And it's interesting because not knowing anything about this movie, when you turn it on for the first time, this scene, you said it, Trace, it feels like it comes out of nowhere, but it's not even, it feels like it comes out of nowhere in the space of the narrative. It's like, wait, what are we doing with these creatures with this effect? If you hadn't picked up on the Jewishness, it kind of feels like it comes out of nowhere, like we've inserted scenes from a Charles Band movie.
Well, because the makeup, I'm saying makeup, but they almost look like Halloween-style rubber masks that don't really move a bunch. But it's still, like, it's horrifying, because, we're killing kids in this scene, we're killing a family, it's bloody, it's violent, and then it's punctuated with a laugh when David wakes up.
Well, sort of. He wakes up and, it's reassurance. Okay, this was just a nightmare. And then we go into a second nightmare sequence where we get to see Nurse Alex get killed by one of these hiding within his room. And what this does is it brings the fear of being Jewish into proximity with what's actually happening to David by moving the nightmare out of North America and into his current surroundings, right? Like, it feels a little It Follows-y, where, it's the nightmare, the horror is starting to catch up with you.
If you want to go into your queer reading, then could you say that for the second dream, this dream within a dream, or I guess it's actually the main dream, he is retaliating against Alex as a woman because he doesn't like women?
I mean, I don't think queerness necessarily correlates to, I don't like women and therefore I want to see them die.
I'm not attracted to women, therefore my subconscious is killing her.
Yeah, I mean, as we get into it and we talk a little bit more about how Jack functions as a bit of an extension of these nightmares, like the nightmares coming into the real world, it definitely seems to be cropping up in relation to the sexual aspects of David's relationship with Alex. So I think you can read a certain level of anxiety around performance and being attracted or being confused by Alex.
The comedic punch, though, I think is just when he wakes up from that second dream and he just says, holy shit, because I feel like that's what every single person in the theater is saying when they're watching this scene.
100%.
Yeah.
And that whole sequence, that sequence will live forever because I am pretty sure that sequence has like single-handedly created a movie and television cliche, which is the dream inception thing, where it just keeps going. Like, you see that all the time. And for some reason, I can't think of any examples right now. But even in, like, actually, no, I think it happened in, like, SpongeBob or something once. Where it just keeps going, keeps going.
And it happens in very basic horror films that are lazy and don't want to do a cheap jump scare. But I'm not angry.
Also,
I was going to say, if Trace's tone of voice seems a little disparaging, we may even have a mini-sode on the Patreon about this, where Trace says this is something he never wants to see in another horror movie. So Trace, then, does this work for you?
It does, but I'm going back to, that's why I think the dream sequences and the nightmares we had before this, they're kind of priming you to be like, okay, so when you start this and you realize what's going on, you're kind of like, okay, it's another dream sequence, whatever. And so it works. I mean, it does help that it's 1981 and it's not 2024 when we're doing this.
Right.
But no, I actually think this does work really well. The problem is it's been aped so many times by lesser directors.
Right. Yeah. I think it works here because it truly does not telegraph that the second nightmare is a nightmare. And it is relatively brief. You know, we do often see it sort of structured this way. It's a longer nightmare first, building up to a big jump scare, and then we get a second shorter nightmare that has a lesser effective jump scare. But you're right. I think the comedy punchline works, and by virtue of being earlier, this feels like a bit more of a novelty. Yeah. Okay, so don't worry. Just 2 nightmares. David is still fine. He's on the verge of being checked out. All we got to do is eat this breakfast. Except, oh shit, Jack is back. Only he looks exactly the way he did after he got mauled. So over the course of his progressive visits, he will decompose more and more and more. Chef's kiss on the practical effects makeup, but I will say this look is my favorite of the 3.
Of his 3 stages of decomposition?
Which I call
I
the stages of Christmas ghosts.
I actually think this is really clever too, because this is really the first time this has been added to werewolf lore. Like, you know, you've always you have had werewolves, and sorry, I have to actually give credit to former guest Megan Navarro, because I had to ask her to be like, has this happened before? And she confirmed. But, you know, the werewolf has always been tormented by the guilt they've committed while they're in the werewolf form. But Landis takes it a step further and makes it explicit with, oh no, you're actually seeing the ghosts of your victims. And do we think there is hallucination, or do we think this is actually the ghost of Jack speaking to him?
Okay, that's a good question. Okay, I'm gonna say the more Jewish answer would be it's actually Jack coming to gaslight. And to tell his friends, listen, buddy, you fucked up and this is the deal now, not just internalization of, you know, him trying to process and, you know, something that's familiar to him, which is his friends, you know, helping him, guiding him himself, I guess, through what he's, you know, what his situation is. It would be the more Jewish answer to literally have your friend, you know, come back from the grave and be like, listen, buddy, you fucked up. You better help me out of this. Otherwise, I'm going to be stuck in limbo forever.
What do you think, Joe? I mean, like, have you ever thought about whether it's like quote unquote really a ghost or just his imagination projecting his guilt out?
I think the easy answer is the latter, right? Because we already know that he feels really bad about it because he's commented on it. But there's a moment after the second visit. So after he and Alex have sex and he wakes up in the middle of the night, he has the conversation with Jack, and then Alex comes out and she says, "I heard voices." Plural.
Oh, yeah.
I missed that actually, so I did not know.
Yeah. So I don't know if it could just be a slip. It could be, oh, I thought I heard voices and she was really just hearing David's. But I kind of think it's more interesting if these are actual ghosts and the whole idea of the undead being stuck in limbo until the curse is vanquished. I just think that's more interesting personally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, because it's not only a werewolf movie, it's also a ghost movie. Yeah, I guess for me, it's always like, well, what the ghosts say to him, it's like very explicit stuff that, I mean, I'd have to go through every scene of dialogue with a fine-tooth comb to be like, okay, is it possible that David could have known this and like put it in his own head? But yeah, I subscribe to the these are real ghosts type thing, because doesn't also Jack says something about how he's cursed, like he cannot move on to the afterlife until the werewolf is killed, the bloodline is ended. And granted,
yeah, David
could be making this up himself, but yeah, I agree. I think it's more interesting if it's if they're real ghosts, and it's funnier.
Yeah, I mean, because as interesting as it would be if David wakes up from a nightmare and says, "I've developed a complicated werewolf ghost mythology," it's far more realistic to assume in a supernatural film that, yeah, you know, his friend comes back and says, "Hey, these are the rules, and fuck you." So it is more that Jewish guilt, as you were saying, Xero. Okay, so them's the rules. Basically, we've got about 48 hours until David will turn into a werewolf. So he needs to die by suicide to end this werewolf line. And in the meantime, all of the victims will just continue to hang out in limbo.
Fun fact, by the way. So there's, of course, this theme carries over in American Werewolf in Paris. But do you know who one of the main ghosts is in American Werewolf in Paris, Joe and Xero?
Mm-mm.
Julie Bowen from Modern Family.
What?
Oh, I did know that. Yeah.
So
wait, that's a deep cut.
She shows up, but she would have been fresh off Happy Gilmore when she was making this movie. But yeah, she's like sitting there with a clawed up face for its entire runtime.
Wow, the duality.
You know what? She's got layers. She can play it all. Yeah, so I did cue folks to the fact that Jack seems to show up whenever we have interactions with Alex and vice versa. So the fact that Jack shows up and then Alex comes in to comfort David, and this is where he kisses her for the first time, and he also simultaneously confesses, "I'm a werewolf." So I'm going to bring in Mercurio here. And this is a bit of an interesting background I found fascinating. So she says, "A remnant of the Victorian occupation with public versus the private, the werewolf figures as a hidden self. He is a seemingly normal man who walks among us, but bears a dark and deadly secret. In literature and psychology, discussion of the hidden self was conflated with deviant sexuality and relayed fears of degeneration and of the sly infiltration of non-normative beings into normative, read cis, heterosexual, and Protestant society." So that's general lore for werewolfism, but I think specifically as we delve into this film, the Jewishness of it, the queerness of it, it really reinforces why the werewolf ultimately ended up being the best pick for Landis, because it's got those historical roots in, oh, this is an interloper. Like, this is somebody who doesn't fit within society in ways that other monsters, you know, it would have been harder to make them fit into that narrative.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So Alex finds him endearing, you know, hey, ladies, when somebody says, "I'm a werewolf," you should definitely invite them to come live with you.
I mean, so I wasn't walking into this conversation as hard on Alex as a character, but the more we talk about it, the more I'm like, oh yeah, I guess the only thing we know about her is she's a nurse and she loves David.
Yep.
Yeah.
And again, it's not me saying, oh, this actress is doing a shit role, or like, it's just she's a bit underwritten, but I think Like, if I'm reading this through a queer lens, I think the character of Alex is doing everything she needs to, and we'll unpack it as we keep going. But yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's coming up to this movie and saying, oh, it's a great depiction of a strong, complicated, nuanced female character. Like, that's just not what you're coming to the film for.
Mm-mm.
But nevertheless, what we were saying earlier with the sex scene, how at least their attraction and feelings for each other feel real, that is important for this movie. And so at least I do believe that Alex does feel this way about him. It's just, there's not it's all from this performance. There's not a lot of in the narrative around her to support why she's so attached to this man.
Yeah. Like you said, Trace, tell me one other thing apart from she loves him and she's a nurse. What else do we know about this character?
she lives in the UK.
She lives in the UK and she's had 7 intimate partners before, 3 of which were one-night stands.
Yes, we do. So she's also a slut, is what we're saying.
Yes.
Okay, here is the thing. I love that moment. Like, this little mini montage of her, taking him to a shop and talking about the cost of inflation in 1981. Oh, God, we've been living in this hellscape for so long.
Comedy.
And just like, oh, girl, same, except we're talking about, 40-something years later. But, we've got the funny scene of him mocking the PDAs by the punks on the tube. Good stuff. It's cute stuff. It reinforces how their relationship is building. But I love when she actually tells him, like, hey, I invited this strange man who I have a burgeoning attraction to into my house for the next couple of days. And I love that she's talking about her sexual partners, because this is the kind of frankness I would frankly like to see in more movies.
And in real life.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Because she doesn't say it with any shame. Like, Trace, you joked, oh, she's a slut. And it's like...
Oh, yeah, I was joking.
yeah, of course you were joking. Because we're always joking when we call people sluts, because we don't slut shame.
No, but you can call me a slut, though. That's okay. Like, I'm totally fine with that. I will wear that moniker with a badge of honor.
Yeah, and don't worry. We do to your face as well as behind your back. So... But I like this idea that she says, hey, I'm going to lay out my sexual history. Also, she's a nurse, so she doesn't fucking care about it at all. Okay, so we get a view of her flat. It's cute. It's charming. It's frankly too small for 2 people, but that's okay. As I said, he's only there for a couple more days. And then we get this sex scene. And it's not great. And I feel like we've already touched on that. So I'll just pose a question to the 2 of you. He's about to change. Can he pass on any kind of werewolf curse to her via contraceptives or lack thereof?
Ooh, that...
I love this question.
I'm actually surprised. I have no idea if John Landis would have considered this, but that would have been a really good avenue to take a sequel. Son of the Wolfman. Son of the American Werewolf in London.
I mean, we're name-dropping other werewolf movies in here, so it's not as though Landis doesn't know we've done, Son of, Bride of before.
Yeah. And actually, gender flip it, it's the daughter of the American Werewolf in London. because, spoiler alert, Julie Delpy's one of the werewolves.
Right.
In that other one.
I love that. I honestly, y'all, write that down. Write that down for later, because we're going to need this to pitch to somebody at some point. I would love to see it. I think it has happened before. I do remember in My Animal, it's a family. And it seems like it's a hereditary thing that's passed down through genes, ignoring the whole, once bitten kind of lore. For the sake of my imagination, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's our legacy sequel to this film, right? We forget about American Werewolf in Paris, and we do, Nurse Alex got impregnated from this one-night stand with David, and she's got a good manners this werewolf baby.
Yeah, I was going to say good manners, that baby. Oh my God, it claws its way. Oh, yes.
I'm with it.
Yes,
I'm so with it.
So good. So good.
Oof. Okay, so after the G-rated softcore sex scene.
Wait, I'm sorry. The one I'm going to say and we can move on. But the very extended shot of him sudsing up her back in the shower as
oh my God, that's the fucking one. That's the, where is the emotion? It's like he's wiping the counter because he just spilled a little sauce. You know what I mean? Like, that's not a caress.
Mine was her kissing his neck and shoulder. I was just like, she's never done sex before. She doesn't know how to do this. No passion here, folks.
She's lying. She's lying about her sexual partners. I don't believe you.
But, like, he's not even doing a good job cleaning her back, so he's not sexy and ineffective at the actual task at hand.
I'm screaming.
You're not even fucking her well, and you're also not cleaning her well. Sir, you are fired. You are a gay man impersonating because you needed a place to stay when you got discharged from the hospital.
She is still dirty.
She is still dirty, and then she gets dick down. Yeah.
And she's a slut. A dirty slut.
My God.
Don't tweet me. Anyway, okay, moving on past this.
Yes. So David wakes up in the middle of the night. He is naked when Jack comes to visit him, but he does protect his modesty with a pillow. And
also, though, it's a medicine cabinet jump scare, which is so cliche. It's almost up there with the refrigerator jump scare. But this works for me because it's not presented as a jump scare.
I would say it's not even a jump scare. Like, well, I guess it is in the way that we're holding on that mirror, waiting for something to show up. And instead it's just, oh, hey, Jack, how's it going?
Yeah, I mean, David screams a little bit, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, actually. Maybe I'm misremembering. But nevertheless, maybe that's a subversion. It's something that would normally be a jump scare, and it's not.
So Jack is basically here, as I said, to ghost of Werewolf Christmas this shit, where he says, okay, I came to you yesterday. We're now one day closer. Are you ready to repent? Are you ready to, like, pledge yourself to Jesus and so on? And, David still isn't ready to accept this. So we have a brief conversation. This is when Alex comes in and says, hey, are you okay? Why don't you come back to bed? I like that David says, I saw Jack again, and this is what he told me. And he even references a couple of werewolf movies. So even though we talked about how the movie is set in the real world, this to me, again, it feels like a deeply human way of processing it. You know what? I'm open-minded, but also I'm not about to just kill myself because I'm cursed. I'm going to tell the person that I'm developing feelings for, some weird shit is going on. What do you think?
Yeah. And I love that it's not like the gut instinct is not just like, let's throw him in the loony bin.
Yeah, she's willing to hear him out. We should also note that at this point, he's more or less introducing the idea that a werewolf can only be killed by someone who loves them.
That's cute.
Well, actually, that's why that's why Alex exists. That's why Alex exists in this movie.
Yep. She literally exists to be the love interest who will get him killed. Yeah.
I will say, to piggyback off my earlier conversation, though, about like horror comedies and like how horror comedies like lean comedy, I think actually a good comparison, especially given the meta nature of like referring to the Wolfman in this film, is Kevin Williamson's Scream. Because I do think that's a film that, I don't know if I would call it a horror comedy, but it's definitely a horror film that has many comedic elements, but is still trying to scare you and is self-referential about films of the past.
Sure. Yeah. You don't want to go with Cursed instead?
No, I don't want to go. I really don't want to go with Cursed.
You know what? Curse is a fun movie, but it's not particularly successful.
No.
Yeah. Okay, so in the morning, Dr. Hirsch drives to the slaughtered lamb in the rain. So this is how we know how seriously he is taking David's claims. He is willing to investigate what the police have already told him is a closed case. So there he encounters the same group of locals. Apparently, we live at the pub, which is, quintessentially British. I love it. And they are not interested in answering any of his questions. They don't want to play chess with him. They basically get down to the point where they say, there's nothing here for you and you need to go. But Darts Guy is willing to have a conversation with him in the cemetery, much to the chagrin of Joker / Chess Guy. And what the dark sky says is that the place is cursed and that David is definitely going to change. So they know everything about this.
And I love that Hirsch is like, better go check on that.
Yeah. Okay. So back in London, we see Alex leaving for work. And this is where I don't think it's all comedy, but there is a lot of comedy interspersed with, ooh, we're watching this clock go down and we're waiting for the moon to rise, because we've got regular stuff like the dog and the cat that hiss at David when he gets locked out, and his inability to find something to eat or take a nap. Like, he's just completely restless, and it makes us restless, but there's a lot of jokey stuff in here too.
Well, and it's also, it just feels very mundane, right? Which is priming us for something that is anything but.
So we get Bad Moon Rising by Creedence Clearwater Revival throughout all of this, but then we do switch into Sam Cooke's sultry rendition of, once again, Blue Moon. And this is where we start, a little bit of screaming, a little bit of sweating, a little bit of stripping, and eventually even some elongating.
Xero, I have to know, do you remember when you first saw it? Actually, did you see this scene before you had ever seen the movie?
No. The one scene that I had watched or sequenced when I was in that Film 101 class in college was the subway scene. So this was new. This was new to me.
Yeah. Do you remember how you felt, though, just watching this? Because I even think, by 2024 standards, this looks awesome.
Amazing.
It's amazing.
My eyebrows are all the way into my hairline. I remember. And it's 3 a.m. I don't give a fuck about my neighbors. The volume is at full capacity. And I actually had to rewind and watch it at least once more. Yes. Just to figure out how the fuck did they do that? And it I want to say it happens fast, but actually it doesn't.
It's slow. It's painful.
It's slow and painful. And I love that. And okay, making a really strange comparison here, but Godzilla. Okay, so Godzilla's transformations, an issue that I have with some of Godzilla's newer transformations is that it's not painful enough. And we should be looking at monsters in general through the lens of they're just animals and they're just straight out here surviving. And a lot of what, the type of shit that they have to go through is painful, which is maybe why, some animals could seem aggressive and stuff with, tarantulas molting or something. It's a painful process and it should reflect that and, kind of demonstrate the rage of, how they gotta let it out, I guess, later. Right. And the practical effects are so thorough and slow. Usually, with this kind of stuff, it's a quick flash. It's burned in your brain at that moment, and you really don't.
Well, we're trying to hide it usually, right? It's we've got a little bit, but not a ton. And this one it feels like we're seeing the whole thing.
Right, and I can't look away.
But it's interesting, though, because that's why they did it in the living room so the furniture could hide aspects of when they were filming. So they were focusing on what they wanted you to see, but there's still stuff being hidden by the couch and the chair in this scene.
Oh, sure. But I just think that, to me, that's smart filmmaking while still giving us so much more. I never would have expected this level of transformation.
Yeah, no way.
Yeah, and I won't go into explicit detail because honestly, you can watch the documentary. I think it's available, actually, not even on the Blu-ray. You can find that elsewhere.
I think it's on YouTube.
Yeah, I don't think it's as interesting to talk about it when you can't see the footage. But I will say, they did storyboards for this. They built the set off the floor by about 4 feet, so that way when they needed to be under him and when the actor needed to be under, they could. The big thing is, though, they did shoot it in reverse for a lot of it because of the hair. So they started with the full set of hair, and as they would go backwards, they would cut the hair. So then when they shot it in forward, it would look like the hair was growing on him.
Makes sense.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm curious, what is your favorite part of this transformation? Do you two have something that stands out for you?
I think I like the feet.
Okay, so the feet was mine too, followed by the back.
Mine, it's not even a part of the transformation. It's when we shift to the shot where it's almost like the camera is right above his crotch. And it's, I feel like it's like the first time we get a full long shot of him from the waist up in like mid-wolf form. And he almost like, his body looks malnourished and almost so skinny. It looks...
Well, he looks too long, right? Like he's gained a whole bunch of length.
Yeah, and I think that's the shot where I was just like, oh... Like, that's body horror right there.
Yeah. Okay, so I have a follow-up question for the two of you. Because, as you alluded, Trace, we get this nearly overhead shot, and things are looking a little bit smooth. And I'm curious, do werewolves have dicks?
God, Xero, in any of those werewolf movies you watched, did you see dong on any of them?
I only saw dong in human form, like once they wake up. I gotta be completely honest. Yeah. Also, first thing I want to say is this is the questions that I come to horror queers for, okay?
Asking the really important ones, right?
The nitty gritty, what the people really want to know. Also, I watched a lot of werewolf movies in November, and I'm so surprised that this is the only one. There might be maybe one more, something that I'm forgetting from my memory, but werewolves are typically bipedal, right? And this is the only one that's like a wolf. He's on all fours. So I can't confirm that werewolves have dongs because I feel like since most of them, let's say 99% of them are bipedal and they're standing up, I would see it if it was there, you know?
Do y'all remember if the werewolf, I mean, it's a woman, I guess, so you wouldn't know, but like
Ginger
the werewolf
Snaps?
in Ginger Snaps, because I feel like that one's bipedal too, but I could be misremembering.
No, so she's not bipedal. That means standing on both legs.
No, I know what it means.
Okay.
I think at the very end...
I can't remember if there's like a standing shot of her. Ugh.
Yeah, and like the full transformation she's done, I think she is bipedal. I could be wrong. I could be just making that up.
Okay.
She definitely don't have a pee-pee though.
People are yelling at us that are listening to this right now. They're like just shouting werewolf movies.
Well, okay, so part of the reason I asked is because, yes, it's a funny question, but also because I feel like when we do see female werewolves, we do see the equivalent of kind of like titties.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, but that's not genitalia, though. I mean, like, that's always a thing where that to me is equal opportunity, you know? Like, hey, like, men show their tits, women show their tits. There you go. Even though, yes, I know, like, women tits are, like, treated very, very differently by society than male tits.
Quite a bit more sexualized.
Yes.
Because I would argue, like, he doesn't have tits when he's a werewolf in this movie. Like, it's relatively smooth.
Yeah, but yes.
Okay, now I'm trying to think of an example of a female werewolf. Because, all right, if we have a chick werewolf, she should hypothetically have like 6 titties.
Yeah. 2. Actually, and I'm sorry, but we're forgetting Judy Greer's werewolf in Cursed is bipedal because when she flips them off, she's standing on 2 feet.
Definitely. Yeah, werewolves can seemingly do a lot. Well, those werewolves to me are starting to move into Van Helsing sort of underworld territory where we're climbing up on the ceiling and we're doing all that kind of shit. So moving a bit more into action territory as opposed to straight up horror.
Yeah, exactly. And I even think like the remake of The Wolfman, I'm pretty sure it's on all 4s, like just running around London.
Okay. Well, once again, listeners, if you have great examples of either bipedal or what is it? Quad people? Quad people. That's just when werewolves are driving around on like 4-wheelers.
They're off-roading.
Or if you have examples of werewolves with dicks, please send them our way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And not like fan fiction shit. Like, I don't want to see your made up.
The real stuff. Or I would really love to see a female werewolf with anatomically correct 3 pairs of titties. I would also love to see that. So if you got it, please let me know.
I feel like I've seen it.
I can't even think of it. Yeah.
Like, only because the image of that is so haunting.
It's got to be out there. It has to be. Yeah. We will find it.
Oh, we will find it. I guarantee you. Someone's going to send it to us.
My research is not complete.
6-titted werewolf.
Okay, so Alex is being questioned by Dr. Hirsch because he has been put off by this visit to the small town. So we're having their combo, like, hey, where is David? Is he okay? Has he been acting strangely? And so on. And meanwhile, it's full moon time, babies. So we see Harry Berman, who is played by Jeffrey Burridge, and his fiancée, Judith Brown, who is played by Brenda Cavendish. They're going to a dinner party, and they take the long way around the back, and they get mauled to death in the park.
And this is a lot of, because we don't see a lot of the werewolf. We see the aftermath, but it's a lot of just like the werewolf's head popping into frame as a jump scare. But I gotta say, man, They're scary.
That shit works.
Well,
yeah.
This wolf is terrifying, and I love that we never waver on that. And we'll talk about it more when we get to the ending. But I love that this is like a legitimately terrifying beast.
Yeah. There's something really scary, particularly as somebody who has always lived in the city, where you think, okay, I need to be worried about crime. I need to be worried about, car accidents or something. You don't think, oh, I need to worry about creatures because that's something that happens outside of the city. That's a rural thing because that's where creatures pop up in horror movies, right? You don't see things happen in the big fucking city like this. So to see nice, respectable people on the way to a dinner party get killed. We've got these three unhousemen. Alf, who is Sidney Bromley, Ted, Frank Sinjanow, and Joseph, Will Layton. They're killed down by the river. And then we've also got this businessman, Gerald Bringsley, who was played by Michael Carter, who was killed in Tottenham Station. And I love that these three very distinct but very urban locations suggest that this wolf is just everywhere. You are not safe anywhere in the big fucking city.
Xero, because I think one of the appeals of this movie is it's like, it's a werewolf in a city, it's not in a village or it's not in the woods. And did you expect or want more city mayhem from this movie?
I think I got a decent amount. Between this, the subway scene, honestly, if you're going to put a werewolf in the city, there has to be a subway scene, just 100%. So that would be the only thing I would ask for if I could have just one thing. And then, of course, the grand finale with traffic. Now that's fun. I think those are really the three things that are completely necessary. So I'm pleased with it. I think the only thing that I would say is less of the, going all the way back to those dream sequences, less of those, because I'm not really concerned about the woods at all. There's really no woods in this movie. Like the moors are not, there's no trees out there like that, but I'm very content.
Actually, Joe, you know what I'm sorry, I'm not going back to those nightmare scenes, but the scenes when he's dreaming of running through the woods and stuff, you know what that reminds me of? And I feel like this must have been inspiration on it, was the scenes with Jack Nicholson, like leaping through the woods in Wolf.
I had the same thought. Yeah.
Lesser version. But yeah, I said this before. I cannot stress this enough how fucking awesome this subway scene is. And that shot with the camera positioned at the top of the escalator as you barely see the wolf come into frame from the top. Ooh, mwah, chef's kiss.
I think the reason that works so well is not just because it's quite a sustained sequence. It's also coming third after we've already seen other people get horribly taken out. Like, even if we're not seeing it, we know what's happened to them. And I mean, this is interesting, right? Because the three of us do live in big cities, but Xero and I, we both live in like cities that have subways like this. And this idea that you could be in such a public place, but it be empty, and then it becomes a kind of maze, because that's what the tube is, that's what the underground is, that's what the subways are. And I love the moment where this businessman, Gerald, he's tried to make a run for it, and he falls face first onto this escalator, and then he is just paralyzed, frozen with fear. Again, it feels like such a deeply relatable human moment where he's not going to get away from this thing, and he just has to watch it come and kill him.
And John Landis' direction to this man when he was, because he's on the subway, and we just get a POV shot from the wolf as we get closer and closer and closer to this man.
Mm-hmm.
He told this actor, "I just want to see living fear, nothing but absolute fear in your eyes," and that was his direction for this scene.
Trace, do you know if this was a stunt actor, like the fall? Because that fall, when he trips and like flies onto the escalator, I actually thought
it hurts.
That shit hurt. And I said, wow. Like right as I watched this to prepare for our recording, I was like, that's how I would run. If I needed to get the hell out of the subway, I'm not taking no chances. I'm throwing myself.
You know, I don't know, because there wasn't any mention of stunt people on this Blu-ray, so that could be an issue in and of itself. Or it could be that because David Naughton was there doing his own stunts in the transformation scene and stuff. So I wonder if maybe a lot of this was just actors doing their own stunts, because it's not like we're, I don't know, flinging them across the city, although sometimes we are, so maybe.
So Landis said, "Give me fear," and he said, "Okay, bet. I'm running for my damn life."
I'll give you everything. Okay, so this does also result in a delightful smash cut as we go from the werewolf to the zoo, where we are seeing a snarling lion. And David wakes up in the wolf pen, and another very, very fun sort of subtle visual cue is that the wolves don't attack him. He is one of their own.
I'm glad you mentioned the match cut with the lion, though, because that also, to me, is funny.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just smart. It's fun. So Alex is waiting at home because she has obviously realized that David is not there when she wakes up. And we get to see David try to make his way back to her in the nude. So yes, he does steal a bunch of balloons from a young, slightly smiley child. The child doesn't seem that perturbed, even though this is very obviously stranger danger to the max. It's a naked man preying on a child at the zoo. And then, of course, we've got him stealing a woman's coat and then having to almost Monty Python it onto the bus as people look at him and say, like, what is that man doing in drag?
The mother's reply, though, to a naked American man stole my balloon. She's like, what?
It's so over the top. Okay, so Hirsch is ringing Alex because he wants updates. You know, hey, David is gone. What the fuck? We need to find him. And when she reveals, okay, he's back here, everything's fine. He's just really randy for me right now. And he's talking about how he's never felt better. This is when Hirsch says, okay, bring him into the hospital so that we can keep an eye on him. So we call a taxi and everything seems okay because we have not been reading the newspapers and Dr. Hirsch didn't say anything. But this cab driver is all about the 6 mutilated bodies that were murdered last night.
My God. This leads to one of my favorite things, though. So David trying to get arrested by shouting every offensive thing at the country of the United
God,
Kingdom.
the Queen is a man.
Prince Charles is an F-slur. Like,
yeah. Shakespeare's French, the ultimate UK insult. Interestingly enough, this is where I'm actually going to bring in Geiger because he does talk about this interaction with the Bobby at Trafalgar Square. And Geiger says, okay, so he says all these slurs or insults, and then David hopes that this culturally offensive turn of phrase will do the trick, but of course it doesn't. What it does do, however, is remind the viewer that comedies of the 70s and 80s thrived because they could be so casually homophobic and transphobic with no repercussions. So the fact that David can say all of this and he just attracts a crowd of people who take pictures and the Bobby says, get the fuck out of here, is very tantamount to how we treated our queers and our trans brethren.
Huh. And see, that would have been totally lost on me because I'm not from London and I wasn't alive at this time.
I mean, I think it speaks to Landis's familiarity with the UK. Like he talks in the documentary about how he grew up on a bunch of different, quintessentially UK texts, but also he had a working understanding of how comedy worked. I don't think he's actually making a commentary on homophobia or transphobia here. I think it's more the ridiculous things that you can say that you would think should get you into trouble, but depending on what you look like and how you act and who's around you, you can kind of just walk away from it.
Right. There's even a quote right after. He's like, "You need to take me to jail," or something like that. I killed a bunch of people. And then some woman is like, "Well, I don't know. Like, this is just a joke, right? Like, this could just be a joke."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because we're doing this in the middle of a public square, presumably filled by tourists, and this could just be a performance. So this person could just be mentally ill. It's the kind of thing that, again, because it's taking place in a city, it's so much easier to write off.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of ridiculous. Like, he fully says, "I killed those people." It's the talk of the town.
And this guy's like, "Go away."
"Are you sure?"
I mean, but that's the thing, though, is like, and I've never understood this phenomenon, but like, because people love to confess to crimes they didn't commit all the time, and I've never understood that phenomenon with the police.
Well, it's attention seeking.
Yeah, I know, but you're going to go to jail.
Well, that's fine with them, because then they get to be worshipped and they get to be talked about and written about and so on.
Guess so.
Okay, so when this doesn't work, David declares his love for Alex and he takes off on her once again. This, I think, for some people is going to be harder to empathize with David because he, at this point, should know what's coming, right? He thought he could get away with it. He killed 6 people. He's now got to process that. But instead of just going with Alex and saying, "Okay, we're going to take you to the hospital where we can look after you," he bails on her. And as a result, we get way more chaos.
He should have just succumbed to the Jewish nagging. I mean,
honestly,
everything would be fine if you just listened to what your friend had to say. That's all I'm saying. It is hard to empathize with this because
it just seems like such a bad decision, right? You're like,
it is a bad
David.
decision. I'm disappointed in the decision that he's making, but also now I'm thinking about, okay, that might actually be the more human response.
Oh, sure.
In tandem with, him leaving Jack in the beginning, him being in denial of what's happening to him, the way that he's reacting to this whole shebang that's going on with his body right now.
Right.
Okay, so maybe I don't condone it, but maybe I could be like, okay, that seems like a more human response.
Yeah, no, I agree with that as well. I think if nothing else, this is that full-blown moment where you realize, I'm not going to get out of this. Like, I thought I was going to be okay, and now I'm realizing, no, this is real. This is actually happening to me. Because he tells Alex he loves her, and then he also then goes to a payphone, and he tries to call home. And, there's this undercurrent of infantilization, or this idea that David is not an adult, but he's not a child. Like, he really is in that sort of liminal space between childhood and adulthood. And the fact that when push comes to shove and he realizes, I'm fucked, the thing he wants to do is talk to his parents.
And that's very relatable, I feel like.
Yeah, totally.
I think it's also a thing, though, where I don't know, like, when you first watch this movie, do you think it's going to end with David's death?
No. I always think that we're going to find a way to save him.
Yeah, so I think that's why the ending works as well as it does. But that's why I think when you're watching this scene for the first time, you're kind of like, oh, this is sweet, but dude, you'll be fine. But no, this is he will never get a final talk with his parents, and he gets this one thing with his, 10-year-old sister?
It's funny and tragic at the same time, but in hindsight, it's way more tragic because he wants to connect with them. He can't even impose the gravitas, like the necessary severity to this girl because she's 10 years old. She doesn't fucking understand. He's just like, okay, well, just tell everybody I love them. So sad. So he nearly slits his wrist, but he can't go through with it. And instead he follows Jack, who now looks more like a skeleton than a human being. And this is where we move into the dirty movie theater. And he's confronted by the ghosts of all of his victims.
Do you like this version of Jack the least because he's a puppet, or is it the middle section you like the least?
I think I like this one the least because it doesn't look quite as convincing. I mean, I think it looks good, but my preference was the original incarnation of Jack because I love that neck wound. Yeah. It just looks so nasty.
I think it's just a thing where it's like whenever the mouth moves, and I get that's how a jaw moves, and we're really just seeing like a skeleton on his face, but it looks like a puppet. Like you can tell this is a puppet.
Yeah.
It looks good. It looks like a good puppet, but yeah, it's kind of like, oh. But because he has a line where he's like, get serious, would you? And I feel like that's almost like a meta commentary on the ridiculousness of the situation, given the fact that it's just a man talking to a puppet.
Right. In a dirty movie theater.
In a dirty movie theater.
In a werewolf movie.
But the biggest laugh, and it's so funny because it's about suicide, is when he suggests to use a gun, and then the blonde woman is like, oh, a gun would be great! Yeah, just put the gun next to your forehead and pull the trigger!
Yeah, she's so happy to help. She's so excitable.
This is great. This is such a fun scene. And again, I don't think you realize that the next transformation is going to happen so soon. Because again, we have less than 10 minutes left of this movie.
Yeah, so before we get to our final transformation and our big set piece at the end, I'm going to bring Mercurio in one last time. So just to reinforce how Jack functions as a narrative device, she says, Jack is a man representative of David's hidden self. So he consistently disrupts David's attempt at a conventional life, resurfacing to ensure the narrative privileges their bond over the heterosexual romance. And I think it's important that, sure, we cut back to Alex every once in a while where she's talking about Dr. Hirsch and she's really scared and they're in the cab and all this stuff. But Alex is kind of not in this movie anymore until we get to the very end.
Yeah, but because I think every time we cut back to her, which, I mean, it's kind of, well, because we're so far ahead of them already, but it's also like, no, please go back to David. I want to see what David's doing.
Yeah, there's something a little more low stakes about Alex and Dr. Hirsch because they are a couple steps behind. But I think it's also, this is, for me as a viewer, the point where I start to realize, oh, that love affair that was really driving a lot of the middle section of the film, it's ultimately less important than the decision that David either has to make or can't make. But, okay. So, a quick cut outside of the movie theater does confirm that it is nighttime. So, we see David begin to transform. And, of course, there is a surprisingly understated masturbatory joke here where the person who's in the theater is like, oh, dude, you got to get out of here. You can't be jacking. Oh, you're a werewolf. Oh, we're all dead.
I'm sorry. I've just got to ask, because I've never been to a porno theater myself, but I just feel like it would be so boring to go to a porno theater and not masturbate.
What a cock.
So this is an interesting thing because obviously they're a bit of a novelty now. Like you can't really find them anymore. They cleaned up Times Square because Disney said so. I went to one in Montreal. I think I talked about this when we talked about Knife Plus Heart Trace. But yeah, you're definitely not supposed to be touching yourself. It's a little cruisy. Like I get the impression you would meet somebody and maybe go somewhere else.
Well, I feel like that's more likely for a queer porno theater. Because I mean, like we even see that in a cruising. But I can't imagine, and maybe I am wrong, so please correct me, but I can't imagine there's a lot of women in these audiences.
No. This is male perverts only.
That's what I'm saying. But granted, maybe there is like a connoisseur or like a film criticism like branch for porno where you're watching and you're like, yeah, I'm just going for the entertainment of these X-rated sex scenes. I don't know.
I also want to keep it real. Like straight men definitely do not have the restraint that queer men do, you know?
I don't know what queer men you're talking about because I don't know many queer men that, if given the opportunity to fuck in any place, they would take it.
No, I feel like, you know, queer men could be like, all right, this is really doing it for me. Let's leave. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like,
I'm not going to jack it right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, okay, but that's because, though, straight men don't have someone they can just walk away with and fuck when they're in one of these porno theaters.
Okay, true.
Gay men
also
do.
True.
Yeah, I do love the idea that there's just a cut scene here where there's, you know, a woman with pointed glasses in there with a notepad saying, yes, I'm taking notes from my academic discourse on See You Next Wednesday. Loving the comedy in this porno. So, yes, David does transform, and needless to say, we do get quite a lot of violence. Most of it, again, off screen, but Villiers arrives as we're shutting this down because the bobbies get called in. We notice that there's gore everywhere, so we do manage to sequester the theater off with this big gate. But then when Villiers arrives, David in werewolf form basically just punctures this thing like it's tinfoil and decapitates this cop.
This head goes flying, and
it's great.
But it's simultaneously horrifying and kind of funny.
Mm-hmm. It is.
Well, I mean, there's so much buddy cop humor between him and his partner throughout the whole of the film. Anytime we see them, the younger guy's always making a bit of an ass of himself. So I do kind of like that it's this jaded, serious cop that ends up getting decapitated at the end.
I want to point out, though, so this is in Piccadilly Circus, which, as you said, Joe, is basically the UK's version of Times Square. American Werewolf in London was the first film allowed to shoot in Piccadilly Circus in 15 years. They were given a 2-night filming permit between the hours of 1 and 4 a.m. Traffic was stopped only 3 times for 2-minute increments to film the automobile stunts involving the double-decker bus. And I don't know if this part is factual because I couldn't find a concrete source on it unless I actually missed it in the documentary, which is possible. But supposedly the way Landis got them to give him that permit was he did a screening of the Blues Brothers for the police, and they were so impressed by his work that they granted him these permits.
I mean, if it's not true, it's a great fucking story.
I was going to say, if it's not true, it's great, but like... But also, I mean, the Blues Brothers was huge at this time. And I'm sure people knew Saturday Night Live, so it's like...
He's that guy who did that funny movie with John Belushi. Great.
I've never seen the Blues Brothers. I have no desire.
Oh, Trace, the chase sequences are so fucking... Like, picture this, take out the werewolf, and then stretch it out about a half an hour. That's what the finale of the Blues Brothers is.
You know what's funny is I actually have seen Blues Brothers 2000, which is also a John Landis film. But it's not good. So
Right. Yeah. But know what is good, folks? This whole fucking set piece.
Oh, it remains good until the credits roll. Like, this never stops.
This is one of those things where, again, not really understanding what the film was the first time I saw this, because I think I casually watched this when I was trying to cover up some gaps in my horror knowledge. So I just threw this on randomly, didn't know what I was getting in for, didn't realize there was horror comedy in here. I thought it was just a straight up werewolf movie. And then I did not expect that we were going to stage the finale in the middle of downtown London and just have, like, the way Landis shoots this is almost cinema verite. It feels like we are at, you know, higher level for half of these shots. I don't even know how he accomplished half of these shots.
Especially when you're like, oh, you had 2 nights of 3 hours each to do this.
Yeah. So it's real good. Just really, really fucking good.
Just mayhem, 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 all in the middle of London.
This is why more monster movies need to take place in metropolitan areas. Because there's the chaos of the monster, and then there's also the chaos of the city. Yeah. And then also the chaos that happens because the people of the city are panicking because of said monster. And it just makes this beautiful chaos soup that's just insane and a great cherry for the cake for the last 10 minutes of any film, in my opinion.
Beautiful chaos soup. Slap it on the poster.
But it's true, Brett. I mean, like, we get this crowd of people who end up congregating outside of the theater when the police are trying to clear the area, because in a fucking city, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get a bunch of people who are rubbernecking anything, like, oh, what's going on over there? Are you shitting a movie? Oh, it's an active crime scene? Cool, let me just get my camera. I'm going to take a bunch of pictures. And then it spills out. I will say my absolute favorite part of this entire movie is just this werewolf strutting down the street.
So good. So fucking good.
It looks amazing, and the people are terrified. And then you just think, well, what would I do if I was just walking or driving and I see this fucking thing? Crash a
Definitely
car.
not rubberneck. I don't know.
No.
I think I'm going the opposite direction. At least I would like to think that I would. But hey, then again, that might not be the human thing to do.
It's true. Okay, so the beast is eventually cornered in a dead-end alley. This is when Alex and Hirsch arrive on foot. She forces her way past this firing line of police officers. I do love the fact that they just kind of let her go. It's fine. You know what? Love's going to save the day, everybody.
Yes.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy. So she runs up to the end of the alley. She sees the werewolf. I do love that even at this moment, you know, the man that you purportedly love after about 48 hours and 3 weeks of him being in and out of a coma, you say, I'm going to treat you like a human being. I'm going to talk to you like the man that I gently kissed the shoulder of and you really badly washed my lower back. And she says, you know, I love you. And it's great. It's really powerful. And then, I don't know, are we meant to assume that it comes out because it's responding to her declaration of love? Or is this thing fully just going to maul her face?
Oh, it's going to maul her. But what I love, what Landis does is he has this extreme close-up shot of the werewolf's face where you see its facial features soften as if it's almost like David's coming out. It's thinking, but he's giving us that because that's what we expect. True love will save the day. But I think when this werewolf lunges, it's going to kill her ass. Like that is very much like in line with other things this movie is doing to subvert your expectations.
Xero, did you buy that as well?
I'm thinking the same thing, honestly. And that's the kind of ending that I would prefer, especially with the little gag in there as well, that, you know, Landis wants us to think that, oh, of course love is going to save the day. But then really at the end, the towel is just like ripped right away from you. Like, psych bitch, love's not going to do shit. This is some supernatural bullshit that we've conjured up. And let's be for real, no one's getting out alive.
Are you two at all surprised that we don't actually kill her, or would that just take it a step too far?
No, I actually wasn't surprised, but I don't think that would have been as effective of an ending, if only because I don't know if we cut to credits when she's like mid-sob, or if it's like, because it feels like the movie just ends, but the last image we're left is Alex crying about her dead lover, and it's... I feel like it ends before you think it's going to. To me, it's perfect. I mean, the ending I do think is a perfect ending for this. So I don't think killing her would have added much to anything. I mean, it would have given you the shock, but I think what we have is more poignant.
Yeah, I think this ending, leaving her alive and just grieving, or at the start of her grief, is definitely more of a fuck you than her actually getting killed by it, because... Now, as a viewer, you got to come to the terms to the fact that love's not going to do shit in this situation. And you're just going to have to live with that.
It's also maybe a warning to everyone saying, hey, maybe don't tell someone that you've known for 3 days that you love them.
Right.
So I'm going to bring Mercurio back in one last time. She says, if the history of cinema suggests a good woman's love will save a wayward man, an American Werewolf in London adamantly denies the power of heterosexuality to fix the beast's queerness.
Y'all, if I had $1 for every time I'm watching a movie and in my mind I'm like, oh, heterosexuality saves the day once again, I could probably quit my job. So I'm very, very okay with this ending.
It's just so mean.
It's so mean.
Yes, that's why I love it.
Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, absolutely.
But then there's the cherry fucking on top where we just go right into credits. But we've got the one final song, so one last cover of Blue Moon, only it's a doo-wop version by the Marcells.
Which, I love that, right? We have just been like punched in the gut as an audience, and then we're walking out of the theater with this ditty.
Right, with a little
And it's
bop.
a banger. It's a catchy song. I love this version. But, that's An American Werewolf in London.
Yep. Great movie. But Xero, as the guest of honor, any final thoughts that you like to say about this movie?
I firmly believe that this is the hardest werewolf movie of all time. I would love to see another film compete with this. I dare you to try. I really do. It's golden. It's a magical display of many things that we can learn from horror and intersectionality, marginalized people, special effects.
Mm-hmm.
It just bangs. I also want to mention that, so I grew up in the West Village, about 5 blocks from the Slaughtered Lamb, which was the, theme bar based off of, obviously, the bar
this
from
movie.
the movie.
Yeah.
Yes. And it recently just closed permanently.
Oh.
I walk by in my old neighborhood all the time. The sign is still hanging, which is cute. I don't know how much longer it's going to be there because gentrification, but...
Yeah.
Steal that sign, Xero. Steal that sign.
I should.
I was unsure walking into this because I remember liking it when I first saw it, but I don't think I was prepared for just how effective this movie was and how deftly it blends horror and comedy. And I've still seen reviews today, even on Letterboxd, that are like, the tonal shifts are very jarring. Yeah. I don't find them jarring per se. I mean, they are. I don't know. I guess jarring feels like a negative way to put it for me. I mean, I guess they are jarring where you're like, oh, right, we're in horror now. But that to me is a good thing, not a bad thing. And so I love that it's a guessing game, not just of what's going to happen in the plot, but which tone we are going with next, which makes it, for me, a more entertaining and involving viewing experience, which is why I think it works so well.
Yeah, it's definitely keeping us on our toes. I will say the first time I watched this movie, I didn't know how to feel about it because I agree with that individual. I found it kind of jarring and a little bit polarizing. But I think once you know what the film is doing, second watches, repeat watches really cement Landis does 100% understand what he's going for. Whether it works for you, obviously it's a personal choice. But I think the reason that people have ultimately come around, the reason this movie does so well, it's not just the FX. Like, this whole movie does work. The FX augment those scenes, but the rest of the movie still has to be effective in order for it to become this classic. And I think it's because it's balancing those tones so well. That's the thing that kicks it over the top.
Well, and this is also my thing too. I think, when all of us first saw this movie, we were in college or we were younger. We weren't we weren't writers, we weren't media people. And I think in the 15 years since I first seen this movie, I have seen many more horror films, and I've also written and podcasted about them. And so I think once you, I'm not saying that sounds gatekeepy, I guess, but I think once you've seen so much of the other stuff that's out there, the uniqueness of this one stands out so much more. As you said, Joe, beyond just the special effects, but in everything about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And folks, that's one of the tricky things about doing a werewolf movie. Like, when you see some of these other ones that are fine or maybe not super great, I do think it helps you to appreciate this one for making a big swing and nailing it.
Yeah, absolutely. But, all right, everyone. That is American Werewolf in London. And before we announce what we're covering next week, Xero, first, thank you so much for coming back. It's been a pleasure having you. But let everyone know, where can they find you on social media?
Well, thanks, you guys, for having me back on the show. I have a blast every time. Every time. From YouTube to the podcast, all of it. You're not fucking around. If you would like to keep up with my shenanigans, I'm always yelling somewhere on the internet. You can find me on socials at Xero Gravity. That's Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, wherever, Twitch too. You can also listen to my podcast called Blurty Massacre with my co-host Sheree the Slayer, wherever you get your podcast fix. So pull up on us.
Yes. Please do. I did y'all coin the term blurred?
Oh, no.
Okay, I didn't know that. Sorry, that's me being very white, not knowing that culture.
Hey, it's the work that needs to be done, because you'd be so surprised how often I travel to nerd and geek-centric communities, and I ask Black people, do you know what a blurred is? As they're in full cosplay from Star Wars or whatever, and they have no idea. So I gotta teach them to be part of the community that they've always been in, but might not know about it. So
there you go.
Well, if you want to get in touch with us, you can reach us on Twitter and Instagram at HorrorQueers. Shoot us an email at horrorqueers@gmail.com. Find us on Letterboxd to keep track of all the films we've covered. And if you want to chat with other listeners, please join our Facebook HorrorQueers group. If you have a moment, I'm going to emphasize this. Please rate, and if you can, review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We have a couple of not great reviews up right now that I would love to see buried in the dirt. So please be nice and go say some nice things about us. If you want even more content, please support the show by becoming a patron at patreon.com/horrorqueers. If you subscribe today, you will get 300 hours of Patreon content, including this month's new episodes on Hannibal Season 1, Episode 4, Late Night with the Devil, Femme, Abigail, and The First Omen. Oh, and to coincide with that religious prequel, our audio commentary for the month will be on the original 1976 film, The Omen.
Yeah, and folks, just because we're crossing a milestone, I'm just going to reiterate how it works, because I feel like sometimes people don't always understand how the Patreon is. It's $10 and you get all 300 hours. So it's not like, oh, you only get access to this month's episodes. You get access to the whole back catalog. It's about 250 episodes. And then on top of that, over 50 audio commentaries. So it's a lot of content. I appreciate that people say, I just don't have money or whatever. I like to say it as it's basically one cheap meal out. So instead of having lunch one day at like McDonald's, you could get 300 hours of content.
McDonald's, that's the Canadian, like, you silly Americans, like, don't go to lunch at McDonald's, just make your own sandwich. But yes, I co-sign on that, everyone. It's really, you get a lot of shit for $10, and then you can cancel your membership, or don't. Please stay and keep paying us.
That too.
Yes. But Joe, what are we watching next week?
Okay, so we're going from a classic to an underseen, I'm going to say minor gem, because I quite like this one. Trace, I think this might be a first-time watch for you, but we're going to be watching Netflix's 2018 film, Eli.
I know nothing about this movie. I think I heard about it when it premiered, but I mean, Joe, that was before we started the podcast.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to correct myself. It's actually a 2019 film, but I think you would still be able to find it accordingly.
No, I'm really excited because I've heard you say very good things about this, and I know nothing about it, so I will be walking in blind. But yeah, everyone, until next week, we can cross out An American Werewolf in London.
Indeed, and cross out HorrorQueers.